And good afternoon. I'm Neil from Sweden, and hey, Cynthia. Yeah, exactly. We're all there with the caffeine, I think. Caffeine's yeah, fourth espresso. Wow, you're ahead of me. But apparently there is a lot of caffeine, though, in the additive that I get in the Smoothie King smoothie. Probably shows. All right. We're going to be talking a bit more about conversion today. I won't be taking quite the same sledgehammer, although it seemed to be very well received last time. But we won't need to take so much of a sledgehammer to your foundations and so forth in this one. So we laid the groundwork or smashed the groundwork last time. I just have a few more things to say that'll continue to help you in how you look at conversion and continue to help you take advantage of all the terrific training and advice that exists in conversion in various places in our training and also outside of it with plenty of books and so forth. Oops, oh, here we go. Hey, Kristen, how you doing? And Neil? Yep, you made it just in time. Yeah, conversion, I'm always fascinated by it myself. So let's start with the first slide here. So I'm a little bit continuing on with what I talked about last time, and I just had maybe some things I would add to, or I don't know, clarify or build with. From last time we talked about navigating categories. Categories is, I've talked a lot about the idea of context, looking at context, looking at what's more like outside, not really outside the box, but like, yes, outside the box, but outside of our immediate context. Often it's easy to, when you want someone to do something, right? You're trying to get someone to do what you want in a sales or conversion situation. That could be not just in a clear sales situation, but also just in dealing with people, right? Where we often want them to do what we want. And it's easy to just be thinking, with it, not necessarily in these words, but it's very easy to start thinking, all right, well, what kind of stimulus, what do I need to say or do or promise or whatever? What kind of stimulus do I need to do to get the response that I want, right? And that's inside the box, and it's actually inside the box thinking is totally reasonable. We do it most of the time. It's just that when do we want to not be stuck inside a box when the box isn't helpful, right? When do we need to attend to the frame or the context? Well, when we're not winning within the frame or the context, right? If we can't win within the box. So there's a lot of our life in just individual situations, we can win with what's readily at hand. We can get the response that we want without thinking about it much. And usually in those cases we hardly even think of it like a sales situation or a conversion situation, right? So you can generally accomplish that anyway. But what happens is that when people can't win within their current context, then people often not sure what to do, really, right? They might have some vague sense that they need to change the game or do something different, but often it'll be like, well, what do I say that's different? Or it'll amount to like, what different stimulus can I give? Right? And this is easy to see in relationships. A lot of times thinking of relationships is an easy illustration of, especially in these kind of conversion situations. And it's so often that people will be stuck in the wrong frame, or set of frames or assumptions and contexts within a relationship, and then they'll be endlessly talking to their friends or whoever or themselves in their head. What do I say now? What do I say? Like, they're always thinking, how do I phrase this? How do I phrase that? How do I ask them this? How do I ask them that? How do I get them to do this, right? And it's always trying to find just the right words, and or figuring out just what the other person meant by this. What did the other person mean by that? And it's like so difficult, right? So when the game isn't rigged for you to win in a clear way, when you haven't won before you attack, right? Then you need to attend to the frame. And so instead of whenever you find yourself in the trap of thinking, what do I say differently, or you're really trying to figure out what is this other person thinking and what the heck do they want and all that, then ask yourself something along the lines of what frame, what context, what would this other person already have to be thinking and feeling or believing about themselves or believing about the situation in order for this to be easy, right? The yes to be easy. So in a dating situation, if you want a person to, whatever, you can fill in whatever blank, go out with you somewhere, do something intimate with you, whatever, then, or just call you, call you back, or be nice to you, right, or whatever, then instead of thinking, like, what did I do wrong, or what could I do differently, or whatever, you could think, what would they have to be thinking about me and feeling about me? And then you can expand beyond that. And maybe there's nothing that they would really think about you or could, because they're not really that interested in feeling like they want a relationship, right? Or whatever it might be. And then, so the first thing is you think about, you often kind of make yourself center stage. But that's still a little bit more out of the narrow box. At least if you're asking themselves, what frame would they have to think about me, including you're thinking about a client, right, or a potential client, potential customer. One thing you could think of is, well, how do they have to think about me, right? And I listed some things last time, many of which have to deal with you, right? Are you an us versus or a them? Are you in like an in-group that they're identifying with at the time or not? Do they see you as competent? Do they like your unique strength? And when I say unique, I'll get to this a little bit later today. It doesn't have to be like fully unique for the world or something like that, but just like is your main strength that you're presenting, is that what they like, what they're looking for? They see you as serious, likely reliable, maybe like one flaw that they can identify, that they can accept, makes things seem more real and natural. Are you conveying belief in your own situation, your own product, your own service, yourself, energy, enthusiasm, and so forth? So these are about how they're looking at you. That can be farther out of at least the immediate context, the immediate box of just thinking about, what do I say, right? If you're thinking, well, how do they have to view me? Now you're expanding what you're looking at, and you might find the right answer better than if you're just looking for what you can say to them, but the outer context is wrong, or the next level of context is wrong in how they're viewing you, right? They're viewing you as an out-group, or they don't necessarily think that you're competent yet, right? Or there's something about your tone of voice or your energy or your sense of belief in yourself that isn't there. And the same thing with a dating type of situation, right? Or whatever, romantic type of situation. If they're not thinking a certain way about you, that it might hardly matter. There might be nothing you can say. It's not about finding the perfect pickup line or the perfect line about how to ask them to go on a date, or get them how to explain to them why they should give you a call tomorrow or show more interest in you, right? Again, there might be nothing within the frame of how they're looking at you. But then it might be greater than that, right? There might be no way they can really look at you if they themselves aren't in a frame where, now we talk about aligning with maybe their self-image or having a vision with, like I referred to, if the potential significant other doesn't really feel like they want a relationship that strongly, if it doesn't motivate them that much right now. If they view it as kind of restrictive, or the main thing that they're wrapped up in is school or a career thing is big and looming large for them right at this moment, or there's not like something like an example that could happen in someone's life is they're quite wrapped up with career and school, and then one or more of their friends have a child, right? Let's say in this illustration they're a woman. This could happen either gender, but it's easy to, I like to use the most stereotypical, easier to remember and picture. So a woman's kind of wrapped up with career and school. She might like doing some dating and maybe even being in a relationship for various reasons, but it's not that front and center, not that motivated. Then a close friend has a baby, stops working, and that seems appealing for some reason. That might change the whole view, and then that outer context might change. And then if you're interested in that person and having a relationship with them, then that change in context might change the whole game. In this case, you might have had nothing to do with it, but at least that illustrates how totally separate from anything that you say or how they might view you, and more external context. Same thing can affect everything. Same thing with a client or a potential client. And then once you're aware of that, you can use that in a whole number of ways. One way is you don't overthink things and keep changing your strategy of what you say and all this, or think that you can't convert well if you're constantly dealing with people who aren't that interested in, their identity isn't really wrapped up that much. Their context and their frame isn't in a place where what you have to offer, the advantage or the problem solving that you have to offer for your product or service, it's just not that important, does not feel that important to them, right? If you're dealing with people like that, mostly or totally or half the time, but you can't tell the difference, then you can start driving yourself crazy with what did I say wrong, or even the stuff, part of the stuff on the slide that has to do with how they're viewing you, right? When the greater context wasn't in your favor and it was working against you. And then you don't need to let that mess with your confidence, or you keep changing your strategy when your strategy is not wrong, except, or at least you're not changing your strategy in the wrong place. You're not going to help yourself by working on how the other person views you and working on your presentation and make it shinier and so forth if you're dealing with people that aren't interested enough, right, in what you're talking about. And then where you want to focus your strategy then, right, strategy is about alternative use, right, of limited resources, and then given that, you, in order to find the best impact, right, once you're dealing with alternative use of limited resources, then you need to figure out, well, where do I direct my resources to have the most impact, right? And then so strategy involves finding the place where you're going to have the most impact. Often people will try to optimize, but if you're optimizing in a place where you're not having that much impact, then that's bad strategy. You might be optimizing well, but you're using bad strategy in the sense that, like, if you optimize your presentation and make it particularly streamlined, beautiful looking, sound great, right? And then you including having a good way to be like more of an us and appear competent and all that. But now you're directing resources potentially to a place where it's not helping you that much, because instead you needed, if this is what you're running into, instead you needed to have figured out that you weren't getting in front of people at the right time and in the right framing where what you were talking about in the first place was particularly important. And people for sure do this with dating, like pretty strongly. People just tie themselves in knots trying to figure out what to say or what the other person's thinking, and why won't this person value me enough, and why do they do this, and why do they say this, and now they're doing that, right? And it seems like people are constantly breaking their word to you. If you feel like people are breaking your word to you, then let me also introduce, let me just write this. I'll just make a little slide actually here. And you want to be aware of the difference between behaviorism versus, let's just say, conversion in this case. And these can look the same. And I'm a little bit being not vague, but a little bit simplified. And I'm just have to use some terms, right, for this. These terms can be used in slightly different ways than how I'm using them, perhaps, in conversation sometimes. But regardless, let me give you a distinction. With behaviorism, it's kind of like what I'm talking about inside the first box, inside like the most immediate context. You're looking for stimulus response. You feel like you want a certain response from somebody, and you're trying to figure out how to stimulate them in order to get that response. What do I say in order to get them to do this, right? It's most easy to see if you imagine somebody kind of whining or getting kind of agitated or their emotions up, and they just want the other person to do such and such. And they might be reinforcing that in their own head. If your self-talk becomes, I just want them to do such and like this, right? Then you're quite in a behaviorist frame of mind. I find that pretty much all, or pretty much all, not all, but a lot of advice about dealing with children is very behavioristic, and all they try to do is sort of launder it. meaning like just kind of disguise it and come up with kind of clever ways it doesn't look like you're really being obviously like just stimulus response behavioristic. But such as I remember reading a book which called like 1, 2, 3 magic, and you basically count to 3, and then there's some vague or specific consequence if you get all the way to 3, and then they get used to doing things at 1, and the whole scheme I'm sure works very well. It's super easy with kids to feel like you're doing things fine, right? The norm for people when they as they become as they grow up is to be very influenced by authority, right? Almost like people don't know what to do if there's not an authority figure or social. It might not be an authority, either an authority figure or social proof telling them what to do. And so somebody can, as long as we assume that's okay, then you can raise a kid to just appear perfectly decent, where they're normal, they quote unquote follow the rules, right, and operate within the system and so forth. And pretty much a whole huge percentage of people succeed at that. It's pretty easy to succeed in your child getting to 18 and still being alive and not being a complete hooligan, right? And so it's very easy to fall into a trap of behaviorism. Whoa, one quick second. That's bizarre. All right, the phone I never use and no one really has the number. I think it was just a wrong number. But anyhow, mostly what I'm saying here comes down to if you're at the level of stimulus response where you're just wanting to get you feel like you just want to figure out how to stimulate someone in order to get a response, then think about what you really want. In some cases, if you're in a rush, then that might be all you need or want. Conversion, as I think of it, as I'm using the term, when you're operating on frames and categories, think about it. If you stay within the box, you're just doing stimulus response within a frame, within the moment and so forth, then when the context changes, the person isn't really changed, right? Their behavior happened, but it's not reliable. And if you deal with people you're working with that way, or that you want to have a long-term relationship with, even as a returning customer, right, or a client, then you're not snowballing. You're not really making progress. And it'll often be like spending on a credit card. Like if you just try to figure out what to say or do in order to get the response that you want, you'll often you'll not build understanding about that person. To understand someone better and to deal with them better over time, then the more you understand about their frames, their overall context, what motivates them, what changes might change how their motivation is. And I'm being a little bit vague here, but once you start looking in this way, I think it's fairly simple and obvious. That and then we go back to this question here that I wrote, which just kind of explains it. If instead, unless there's a super rush that you're in, and then you try to get yourself out of being rushed in life, because it just messes with all your decisions and strategy when you're in a rush. Why? Because specifically what a rush does is it distorts the sense of importance. Because importance, there's what seems important, and then there's what actually will have the most impact on the goodness, the results that you get in life. I'm not saying goodness and results are the same thing, but either one or both. Goodness is a little bit vague in one sense. That's why I also said results. So, right, the place that our mind is going to screw us up the most by default is how important things really are in terms of actual impact, right? And so things will constantly seem important that aren't very important, and things that are very important will seem unimportant. So it's screwed up a lot. And when you're in a rush, and this is obviously an important concept for the rest of your life, right? A rush distorts importance even worse. And when your sense of importance is distorted, that's at the root. It's one of the few things that's at the root of everything else, right? Like you're foundationally going to use bad strategy, bad thinking. Your intuition's going to be wrong. Your conclusions are going to be wrong, etc. And it's going to like snowball downwards, be like a downward spiral. So however much you're in a rush, day to day and in life in general, then again your sense of importance is being distorted that much, and then everything else is just tainted. All your decisions are impoverished and made worse by every rush that you get yourself in. There might be other reasons why you sometimes need to be in a bit of a rush or have time pressure. But again, the sense of importance will generally be screwed around with. All right. So whenever you catch yourself just asking what to do in the moment to get a response that you want, unless it's easy, and I know that's a little bit vague too, but it's vague in a kind of a nice way, where if you're having an easy time getting what you want, then that's a reasonable indication that the frame is okay. Right? There's no red flag there, and you can't pay attention to everything in life all the time. You can't be trying to examine every frame or assumption or someone's context or your context in every way all the time, right? So you have to pick your battles. So if it's fairly easy, if you're in flow and things are going well with a prospective client or a relationship or whatever, then cool. But whenever you spot spot and find. I said it once, find. But whenever you spot or find yourself where you're really kind of twisting yourself in knots, trying to figure out what does this other person mean, and so what do I say back, and what the heck is going on, then you want to ask, well, what context, what would they have to be thinking and feeling in order for this yes to be easy? And when I say what do they have to be thinking and feeling for a yes to be easy, that's a little bit of an example. There can be I'm trying to think what I'm trying to say here. In essence, in life, whenever something's difficult, then you want to, unless you're in a huge rush, you want to look at the frame. You want to look at the context and try to think what could change more deeply, more overall, that would make whatever it is easier. If you're trying to spend more time working on implementing stuff you're learning and you find you have a hard time doing it, then you can try just sitting down and getting started, and that's reasonable. Just the same thing as if I want my wife to do something, I could try just asking her, right? And so that's the first thing, is to try to work within the box, right? I don't start by trying to change every assumption I have or overcomplicate everything, right? So first you just try and do something, and you can push it slightly, right? Like maybe push it one notch, where if you feel like not getting started working, just sit down in your chair and think, well, what's one thing I can do that's fairly simple, and get started, and that may well work. Because in essence, even with that, you're changing one frame, which is just kind of where your momentum is, right? So even that works on context. If you just say, well, what's one thing I can do, what's the easiest thing I can do? I'm not going to say I'm going to sit down for an hour. I'm just going to sit down for a minute and start doing one thing, right? Even that works on remember, frames stack. There's a whole bunch of greater context that you can operate on. And so in that case, you dealt with it as a momentum, where you just got started doing something else, and that might make everything work for you. And then you might just work for an hour and do your stuff. If that doesn't, then let's say you start to work, but your mind keeps going to some problem in your personal life. Or you just feel like you have to do a whole number of things at once. Or you don't feel like you're sure what's important and what isn't to work on. Then if that keeps messing with you, then you need to ask yourself, well, what frame would, and this is still conversion. This is now you're doing the same thing with your own mind as you might do with somebody else. It's all the same process, and the more you do it either with other people or with yourself, the more it makes sense, and the more you're able to get yourself to do things and other people to do things and so forth. Again, but not by stimulus response, by understanding in a good way. You're getting yourself and other people to do things in a way where it's based on increased understanding, better context, and that snowballs in a good way. Oh, it spirals upward. So I was saying that if there are these nagging things on your mind that kind of keep you from focusing when you're trying to get to work, and you first try to get momentum on your side and that still doesn't work, then you operate on some of that context. Oh, and you ask yourself, well, what frame would, I kind of interrupted myself. I was in a good about to share a pretty useful thought for you here, or actionable or whatever. This probably hit a number of you. So if you say, well, what would have to be true? What frame would have to exist where I would be working right now on this, implementing this stuff that I've learned? I'm working on setting up a Facebook page and getting views to it the way somebody showed me, right, in OMG, or I'm ranking a website, whatever, or getting a YouTube listing up, or Amazon listing up, or a YouTube video. So you're working on that, but it's sort of not happening for a number of reasons. And then but you ask yourself, well, what would have to be true? What would I have to believe about the world? Or what would my mind have to just kind of, what frame, if that was kind of my total frame, you ask yourself this way, if that was kind of all that was going on, if that's what I was surrounded with, what would it be that I would need to be surrounded with that would make me, or my mind, make me want to just do this and do it effectively? And one thing could be, well, what if part of it was, part of that frame, because frames can have ingredients, like I mentioned down below here on the slide. So one ingredient for the frame might be that, look, I can't work on 3 or 4 things at once. And I've decided that I'm going to do this first. Right now I'm describing a frame. It doesn't mean that you automatically adopt the frame, but you might find that as you describe a useful frame, it might just be easy to adopt. So you might think, all right, what I've done is I've listed the various things that I am wondering about whether I might want to do those things instead, or implicitly my mind is wondering because they keep popping into my head while I'm trying to work. So I write those things down. Maybe there's 4 different things that I feel like maybe I should be working on. And then I realize, wait a second, clearly I can't work on them all simultaneously. Right? I'm not going to have 4 laptops and be working on them all. Or one of them might involve being on the phone, one of them might involve planning, and 2 of them might involve being on the computer typing stuff in. I can't do all that simultaneously. So I look at them and I think through which of these might have the biggest impact if I accomplish it first. And I came to the conclusion that, well, I couldn't really tell the difference between 3 of them. So if I can't tell the difference, it's probably not a big difference, and I'm just going to have to pick one. And I can just pick one at random and be totally comfortable with that. And I can just say I'm going to work on it for a certain amount of time and see where that gets me. So during that amount of time, then now it makes perfect sense that I would want to only focus on that. And not just intellectually, but if I look at the opposite, then no matter what, when I say look at the opposite of not focusing on one thing would be being scattered, having your mind scattered. That's clearly absurd. That's clearly ridiculous, right? And so I don't want that. And there's a powerful thing I just walked us into here, which is, let me, I have a slide on this. It's actually a pretty amazing concept. I think it's this, or this one. All right. And we'll do the best we can with this here, and I think it'll give you the building blocks to, that'll be pretty helpful for you. It might click right now, it might not, but something will probably click with it. And it's a pretty major idea, and it's something I've been working on for a while. And I've hit a certain amount of clarity with it that may not be complete, but in some ways it is. So we will attempt it right now. There's something that doesn't add up on this bottom line here. I said because something doesn't add up with a normal view of, I said that sort of thing, but the sort of thing I'm talking about is we talk about like, well, my subconscious mind and my conscious mind, or well, I want to do this, but I keep feeling like doing other stuff, right? So it's like we have this inner conflict, or like consciously I want to do this, but then it seems like subconsciously, or my mind, or whatever words we put to it. There's like emotionally we'll feel like doing one thing, intellectually I feel like doing another, and so forth. But there's something going on there for sure, right? There's something going on definitely where we can come to the conclusion that we want to do something or feel a certain way or like a certain person or want to do a certain activity because it'll be good for us, or not eat a certain food, whatever, or exercise a certain amount. And then, but then if we might not do it, or we might feel conflicted about it. It's certainly true that something is going on where our subconscious or something about our mind emotionally, however we characterize it, it's more like a horse than an elephant. It's more like an elephant than a horse. In the case, it really drives behavior, and mostly the rider on the elephant isn't really in control, and they're more like the rider's more like your intellect, whatever, is more like a lawyer or a salesman than an observer or a judge, or like an impartial judge, or a wise arbiter or something like that. So it's much more like decisions get made off screen by your mind, like subconsciously or however it's working, and then you just feel a conclusion or justification about it that's quite biased and a lot more like what a lawyer for a certain side would come up with. That and this is how other people are and how your own mind will operate on you. So the frames that you don't even see, the processing of your mind that's kind of off stage, is influencing you way, way, way more than it feels like it is. It both influences you very powerfully, and then just like consciously you just get something that comes across like a wise concluder or a confident judge or observer, but really it's much more like a biased lawyer, right? A little bit like the media presents itself as unbiased and like a journalist, when obviously sometimes it's more of like an advocate for a certain point of view, and your mind is doing the same thing to you, like what you might even think of as your conscious mind, or the conclusions that come to you consciously and you feel like are coming from you. Very much like an us that it's coming from, but there's not a person there. It's just your mind spitting out a conclusion. But that conclusion, it's presented as if it's like the ideal form of the media, where it's like a journalist, like that's impartial and just reporting the facts or correct conclusions, or even a very wise place. But instead, it's a very biased, like a lawyer, like advocate for a particular position and justifying with BS. And experiment after experiment shows that that's basically the case. Including even the one I mentioned a few times, which is the experiment where they showed people 4 nylon stockings that were identical, and asked which one the people preferred, and they significantly preferred the one they looked at last versus the one they looked at first. Like the number of people that picked the last one was much higher than the first one, even though they're identical. But then asked why, none of them would say it's because it's the most recent one that I examined, right? So what I'm coming to realize here, though, is that like whenever we try to pin down, well, what's this ego, what's the id, what's the subconscious, what's the conscious, if you look at it closely, you can never pin anything down that really makes sense. And it would maybe be too much of a tangent for me to show that to you, like show you all the wrong ways that things don't add up. But I'll skip over that for the moment. But I'll just tell you that in my going over it for years, nothing really adds up that well. Like if you want to work on a task or you want to go exercise or something, then what is it that we want to pin down about your mind that wants to exercise? Is it like the intellect? Well, what's that, right? versus what is it that doesn't want to exercise. And there's something, but then there's other times when we make a change, like in an instant, where we realize something or we look at something a certain way, and it becomes easy to do something like kind of perfectly that's new. It could even be exercising or not eating meat for some people. They, in one moment, like they read something and they don't want to eat this. I'm not advocating eating meat or not. I'm just giving an example. I've done both in my life, and I eat meat now, currently. So, so what is it? Or if someone cuts us off and we think, oh, that person's a jerk, but then we see who they are, and it's someone that we like, and then we instantly change. We don't think they're a jerk anymore, or we find out a reason why they did that, and it made perfect sense, and then we no longer, or they realize it was just an accident or something like that, and then we change our mind in an instant. So what I'm realizing is going on here, and I'm saying this too as kind of a bit of a work in progress, as I said, but I've had a bit of an insight with it, which is it's really, if you think of it as different frames, so like with a woman, she might see herself as a mother sometimes, a lover other times, a business person other times, or a daughter other times, or a friend, right, depending on the situation. One identity might be more first and foremost. Or a person might see themselves one way, but then when beach season comes up, the summer starts to come up, and they start to think about themselves in a bathing suit, then that's a different context that they're seeing themselves in. And maybe they weren't really identifying much with their body and how it looked much at all during the winter, just because other things were on their mind and there were different identities that were more important. But then when someone imagines going to the beach, then they identify more differently with their body. So that's what I mean by like these frames and contexts, identities, categories. And then so instead of thinking in terms of conscious and subconscious mind, because another thing that doesn't add up is that we don't have any conscious mind. None of our mind is conscious. It's all non-conscious information processing. What we're conscious of is our consciousness field, which is not our mind. Our mind is part of the reason for why we're aware of what we're aware of. And I've talked extensively about consciousness field in earlier alchemies, if you haven't listened to those yet. So we're not conscious of any of our mind. All of our mind is subconscious or unconscious, and we're not conscious of it. We who are a being that's conscious are not conscious of our mind directly. We're conscious of our conscious field, and again, our mind is part of the reason for that. So that's another thing that doesn't add up, is we don't have a conscious mind. We have a part of the mind that, or either part or all of the mind that's responsible. Some of it's feeling important right now, or calculating. It's calculated by the mind to be important right now, and it's playing some of the model or ideas or processing in your mind is playing a more prominent role in what you're thinking and seeing and feeling right now than other parts of your mind. In that sense, there's a reality to some of your mind is consciously or at least active, right? An active might be different than inactive, but then things that are part of the mind or your brain that's inactive right now could be activated later or in a few minutes or in a different situation. So there's what's active or not, which might affect its sense of importance, or whether what's encoded more when it comes to memory, what's being taken into account more when it comes to the weighting of different frames and associations and so forth. Like how important is it to exercise? Would feel it's not of a static amount of importance, right? If it's beach season coming up, then that can be like something's going on that's giving that a different weight, right? A different importance than when it's not beach season. Even the person's same mind that might have the same neuron configuration essentially, right? There weren't a whole lot of different neurons that grew or either grew or get weakened or diminished over time. right? Connections can atrophy or they can grow. Even if nothing's really changed biologically, if just something happened in the moment to trigger a sense of, oh, the summer's coming up and I'm going to be at the beach, then something's going on, obviously, to give things a different weight, right, in terms of judging the importance of exercise. And we couldn't really call that the conscious mind or subconscious mind or ego and id or intellect and emotion and logic and emotion and all that. Or like logically I think this, but emotionally I think that, or my head says this and my gut says that. But if we think in terms of frames and categories, it can make more sense, including that if something is really integrated into our behavior, and maybe we make a change at some point, and all of a sudden we constantly do things one way rather than another way. Or we start drinking or stop drinking, or we start dating a new person, and now that person is who we're dating rather than the previous. But in all kind of situations now in our mind, all the frames, that the new person might be switched in rather than the old, or they might not be, right? In which case you can have some conflict. So now if we think of it in terms of what categories are active, what frames, what identities there's active, and then there's something I'll use the word conditional for a moment. What's possible to do, and this is especially with the law of non-contradiction that I've talked about in the past in alchemy, that's so powerful, is what you can do, and you can be talking to a client, you can be doing this with yourself, if you show how the opposite of something is absurd, but always, then in all categories, no matter what the frame is, no matter what the context, no matter what the situation, no matter if the client has to go home and talk to their spouse, then if you make it so no matter what changes, that a certain decision or a certain conclusion is still true, then that's going to be carried out. That's going to be, you're going to be safe with that sort of thing. If you decide that, not even decide, it's not a decision. If you get to the point, if you think through things to the point where a certain type of food is not something that is going to eat, and you check it in all kinds of different contexts, and you see that it's still true. And typically that's going to be because eating it is absurd in every situation, for whatever reason. If that's the case, then it'll be easy not to eat it even when the context changes, even if you're out with friends and they're all eating it, or it's right on the menu of the restaurant and you have to get something, right? And if it's still easy not to do it, that's because one way or the other, your decision about that, or your vision about it, whatever, the association, the way that your mind has looked at it, is regardless of the frame, regardless of the context, it's still true. And then you can do this when you're doing conversion. If you just kind of build a case for something, but it's sort of just built on like weight of the evidence or a bunch of positive reasons for something, then those might not translate very well if the context changes or if the person thinks of objections. But if you say something like, no matter what, a business needs traffic, and not just because you say it, but if they see it that way, like if you had no traffic, would your business work, or would you feel good about yourself? Or is it true in every case that if the phone rang twice as much, that it would just be exciting all around? You could plan better. You can even accept better customers because you could filter some of the worst ones out that you might still take now, and so forth. And you need to do that one way or the other. And here's and then it becomes a question of how they're going to go about getting that extra, twice as many phone calls to ring or whatever. But if you kind of get a full sense from the person that, yeah, no matter what, that's what they want. Or once a person decides, well, I definitely want to get married, and then it's a matter of just who I get married to, then that's very different than if they're not sure if they want to get married, right? Hugely different situation. And Now, we don't only need something to be true, we don't always need to be true in all contexts. What you can do is with if-then statements, and I'll go back to this other slide. And I think we'll be able to tie this together in a way that'll particularly make sense as I continue here. I just had to lay the groundwork for a little while before in this webinar. What you can do is you can make something true in all frames, but still as a conditional, where it's not actually all frames, but like where you stipulate something like, as long as you're doing business, or unless all of your business, unless all the business you're ever going to want, including the customers that you're going to want to take on, can all come from just referrals, right? Unless that, like direct referrals from existing customers, unless that's the case, then is it true that you want new traffic to your website or new people to call you on the phone and that sort of thing, right? If you're talking to a prospective client. If they say, yeah, absolutely, right? Like if they clearly agree, now you've set a frame where, and you can even just emphasize it with the opposite and say, so like if the phone wasn't ringing at all, if no new customers ever came in to your business, what would that mean to you? Would that just be like clearly what you don't want, right? In no circumstance would you want to have no new leads or customers for your business. So you've shown how the opposite is crazy. There's no way. So now it's a matter of they want new leads, new customers. They're very clear on that. Even things that would be clear once you point this out aren't necessarily clear to somebody's mind, including your own, right? Like the idea that you can't work on two or three or four things simultaneously. That once I point that out with the law of non-contradiction, we're showing the opposite, imagining doing it and seeing how absurd that is. Then it's totally clear. But there's a very powerful illusion regarding that stuff where you're like, oh yeah, I knew that. Oh yeah, that's obvious. Well, no, a lot of things that are obvious or that you supposedly knew or that I supposedly knew, once you think about it clearly with the law of non-contradiction or showing how the opposite is absurd, things that are clear after you do that were not clear to your mind. They weren't being processed properly by your mind until you do that exercise. Or the person that you're actually in a romantic relationship with, or a person that you're looking to do some kind of business with or doing a business with or trying to convince them of one particular thing, that the opposite is absurd is not going to be taken into account clearly by their mind, or maybe at all by their mind, necessarily, unless you point it out or they think it through. And just because you say the words doesn't mean that they got it, right? They have to have seen the scenario some way itself. But there's a point where they can see that, just like me saying you can't do 3 or 4 things at once doesn't necessarily make it certain and clear for you that you can't. But if you imagine it clearly yourself and you see how it's clearly absurd to do 3 or 4 tasks well at once, and there could be exceptions, but just because you can picture some things you could do simultaneously, I'm talking about things that you actually might be cluttering your mind about doing or that you might be fretting about while you're trying to do your work. Some of those things definitely you can't do at the same time that you're doing some other work. And that's what I'm talking about. So when you see the scenario for yourself, how the opposite is absurd, either in all cases or in a defined set of cases. If you're doing business, then you clearly want new leads to come in. Right? If the person's retired, they might not need new leads to come in. So it doesn't have to be true in all situations that are possible that this business person wants new leads. But you do an if-then statement as long as you're doing business, or as long as your business isn't such to a point where you get all your business from referrals somehow. And even if they were to imagine that's the case in 10 years, well, then how did they get there? Right? They would have gotten there by getting enough new leads, and really a lot of new leads, in order to get the right customers, be able to focus on doing a good job with those customers. If the business person that you're talking to had to spend so much of their focus getting new leads and selling those leads rather than fulfilling their product or service, then maybe they never would have gotten to where they're getting good referrals because they never could devote enough focus to their product or service. And you can point that out to them, perhaps, if that resonates with them, right? A lot of that I've talked about before. You're plugging into something that's going to resonate with the other person's self-image and what they imagine. But if a person imagines oh wow, it'd be great to have such a wonderful product that I built, such a wonderful service that's so effective that all my traffic comes from referrals in 10 years. That would be like paradise. If they feel that and they're seeing that, great. And then you say, well, how did that happen? Wouldn't it have had to have happened by you not having to focus very much on traffic and conversion, but instead you can focus on developing and fulfilling your product or service, right? And then they say, yeah, that's the case, right? And the law of non-contradiction is hidden in there, in a sense, where the opposite is probably fairly clear, right? What the opposite is, you're drawing a distinction or a contrast there between what if you spent a large chunk of your time on getting new leads and converting them and selling them, versus if you had all that or most of that time back to devote back into your product or service, either developing it or just performing it with more focus, right? There's a clear distinction. There's a clear opposites there, right? They can move 50% of their time, maybe 10% of their focus can be on leads and traffic if they're working with you, right? Instead of 60%. So 50% of their time and focus got shifted over into product development and product fulfillment. And that's a clear distinction. You can see the opposites. That 50% is either one place or it's another place. Period. So the opposite is clearly wrong, right? Where they have 60% of their focus on new leads and sales, and versus 10%, and then they have 90% over at their on their product or service. And then that's true in all contexts. If they say, oh, I need to go talk to my wife, and they're explaining to their wife, now you've given them clear distinctions where there isn't really, like, once you've defined things clearly, if you're in business, then this has to be the case, right? And if you're right, and if they see the opposites, then it doesn't really matter so much what their wife says, right? Or their business partner that they're talking to later. Because this is the thing we run into, right? If we're talking to potential clients, then they're going to sometimes want to discuss with someone else. Now, if ideally you get that person in the room to begin with, or you explain things so well they don't need to do that. But if people do run into that, and it's just a good example of what I mean. And even if they're not talking to someone else, they'll be talking in their own head, right, to themselves, and wanting to feel like they made a good decision, and then the next day making sure that they're still sold the next day. If you're behavioristic, then when the context changes the next day, which nothing has to change in their life the next day, what changes is they're not sitting right in front of you and you're not pressuring them, right, and you're not providing the whole frame just by being right there. So that frame goes away. And then the next day they wake up and they don't have you right in their face, stimulating them in just the right way, right? And then you want the conversion to stick. If you were just thinking without realizing it in terms of the box or the frame of you being right in front of them, selling them, and you didn't plan on when the box changed the next day, right? Same thing with a romantic situation or a potential romantic situation. Things naturally change by not having the whole frame that you're imposing on them there in the future. And of course, you can plan it. When you think that way, you can also plan ahead and say, how do I keep a frame available that keeps them in velvet ropes, as Cotton talks about it. So you can have ways that they maintain a certain context that keeps them doing the right thing with you. But then you plan ahead for that, and it's still not going to be you sitting right in front of them selling them, right? If you have to put a big push into selling somebody while you're in front of them, and Cotton doesn't even meet with people in person, you know? But what does that do is he didn't need to push really hard in the beginning. He just did it right with the framing the whole way through. And then if you don't have to push really hard in the beginning, you don't have the problem of that push not being there the next day, right? And then have the bounce back from not having that. If it's a fairly easy sell in the first place, that means it's going to also be more likely to stick. So when a person is thinking about this the next day, if you made it clear with, you set the overall frame, you say as long as these conditions are true, and those are conditions that will basically be true the next day, right? That they're still in business, or they still need leads, they don't have all their stuff coming from referral, etc. Then you need to get traffic somehow, and then you can get into your product, like explaining how you solve that. I'll get into that now. And let me make sure to tie this to what I was saying. So in addition to the other things I've talked about, in addition to thinking about frames, rather than just being within the frame, and the red flag of noticing when you're just within. Everyone will affirm, oh yeah, I don't want to think inside the box, or oh yeah, I think outside the box. But you can now notice as a red flag whenever you're just having to overthink inside the box, whenever you're fighting and battling and trying to maneuver with tactics. What do I say? What did this person mean? How do I interpret this? How many days do I wait before I send the next At the point where I've never asked myself that question. How many days do I wait before the next contact? Because what I realize is that the minute I have to ask myself that, I'm operating in a frame where I'm set up for failure. I might win, but I might lose, and I'm battling and battling. And why would I want to do that? I can use my effort and creativity in life on frames when you're not in a rush, on creating the right context, on winning before I attack. And then it's the opposite of deficit spending. When you're spending your time and focus and energy battling within a frame where you might win, you might lose, it's exhausting, and you're not getting ahead because the overall frame isn't getting acted on. You're spending all your resource in the wrong place. You're just essentially running in place. Maybe that's keeping you afloat, to mix metaphors a little bit, but you get ahead by chilling out, realizing that it's okay, even if it looks like you're making negative progress, where for a little while you're just spending money, or you're not making obvious progress towards getting more money or more clients or whatever it might be. When you're operating on the you can be getting to know, like being like an anthropologist, getting to know people in the niche that you're operating with and so forth, but not be making any sales while doing it, possibly. But in general, if you're getting to know the context and you're figuring that stuff out, then you're getting ahead for real, even if it doesn't look like it on the surface. And then your life snowballs more and more. So it's a red flag whenever you find yourself fighting within a box or struggling within a context to convince someone to do what you want them to do. If you have to really think about it, if you have to really push and talk to a person for 4 hours and take them out to dinner in order to get them to go home with you for one night, then you have to repeat the whole process the next day, right? And it's the same thing with a client. If you have to push and push and push to sell them, then they buy, you very well might find that you're going to need to keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and they're going to keep changing the deal on you and so forth after they supposedly agree or buy. You see? So what you need to do is think what context would have to be the case in order for it to be easy in a relationship or with a customer or a client. And I absolutely do that. If you look at Do I Practice What I Preach in OMG, if you reread any sales letter, then it sets things up for a good experience after the sale, and so forth. So, and then I continue to operate and reinforce a context for success in any number of levels. Okay, let me wrap up some threads here. I was talking about with ourselves. I was talking about the law of non-contradiction, sales, product. Okay. I think I've communicated decently what I wanted to say about frames, conversion, and trying to get you want to get the frames on your side, but then you can actually get to where the person's like buying decision or their decision to work with you or whatever, or your decision to exercise or do a particular task or complete a project or achieve an objective is true within all context that you, like within like a stipulation. Such as if I'm trying to make money, then at some point, then first I might take a look and learn some different stuff that's out there and so forth. But then at some point I'm going to go after a specific objective, right? And it might not be a final objective. It might be something that if I accomplish it, I give myself such an advantage. If you've heard me talk about semi-soft locks. And I think I'll have more to say about that on Monday, actually, when I talk about business planning as a whole. And I can even maybe tie together even more what I started to talk about here. But you can say, all right, so, you can kind of have a series of where you say, all right, I do need to make some money, period. So I got that. I have to make it one way or the other. Given that, then now, and I've looked at different things, even within OMG, maybe I've looked at some different things, and I've decided I'm going to take this thing and that thing, I'm going to combine it. I'm going to combine YouTube with working on Amazon to some degree, and it might be a greater degree as I get to go, but I'm going to do some with that. And then I'm going to do some with social media. I might do that as its own project. I might do it along with an affiliate thing I do with YouTube. It might be with Amazon. But all those things I can do overall in kind of in the next several months. It might look like slightly different topics, but it's basically one whole thing where I'm getting to know this way of thinking with online business, getting traffic to offers, and it's all practicing and doing the same type of thing. It's all giving me a set of skills that can be packaged somewhat specifically for various potential clients, right? It's not overly broad, but it's not overly focused yet. Maybe in a year I might specialize even more, but I'm not going to start out specialized before I know, before I generalize a little bit, right? That is I'm giving a scenario that I'm not saying it applies to you or not, but it is an example. So I might say, all right, so I have to make money no matter what, right? It's absurd. I'm not going to, the opposite's absurd. I'm not just going to sit around and not do something to make money. And plus, even if I have a job, then that's only going to get me so far. That's great for now for my stable base, but I'm not going to break free. And I want to break free. Let me check that. Let me make sure I do want to break free. What's the opposite of breaking free? No, I don't want that. I don't want to have no real financial hope in my life. I want the hope, the excitement, but in a good way, the energizing excitement of being able to break free. Now is a great time in the history of the world for that, with the internet being pretty new and mobile and social media. And there's not like a lot of gatekeepers that I have to get through right now in this day and age. And so I'm going for breaking free. Even if I don't become a millionaire in the next year or two, then what if I just create an income stream that's really based on something I create that I control more? Would I like that? Yeah, I definitely like that. That's really cool. And then with the internet, I do have the potential to be a millionaire. And what if I'm a millionaire in 10 years, right? That can seem like a long time right now when I'm sitting here, but let me stop and actually think, all right, if I'm 35 right now, I'm personally 43, but whatever age, if I'm 35, if I'm 45 and a millionaire, how will I feel about that? And if I imagine myself right now, before thinking about becoming a millionaire, but just kind of imagine myself yesterday or whatever, thinking about myself at 45, what did I picture by default? Did I picture myself as being a millionaire? If not, then if I become a millionaire by 45 in 10 years, then how does that compare? Especially if I do it smartly, right? Certainly, I could become a millionaire and screw that up and be less happy, theoretically, but I can certainly see how it could make me more happy in a number of ways. I don't have to change my expectations of, or my standard of what I need to have in life. I can keep that the same, but then I can just enjoy having more security. I can buy a few things that don't involve huge commitments to long-term monthly stuff, right? Most of the drawbacks, as an aside, most of the drawbacks to becoming wealthy involve commitments to a lot of future spending that ends up being a burden. Even just taking on the identity, oh, I'm a millionaire, or I make $1 million a year, or having a bunch of other people that you decide you're going to take care of and show off to, then if you do that, then you can make yourself less happy. But if you keep yourself kind of pretty similar to how you are now, but then just have $1 million or several $1 million, and you just use that wisely in a number of ways, then that could be pretty nice. And so you imagine that and say, wow, actually, if it happens in 10 years, that would be terrific. And if I was guaranteed that I'd be a millionaire in 10 years, I could probably be pretty happy about that even right now, you know, and it's worth working for. So you can think that all through. When you picture that, remember, even if it seems obvious or it was easy to figure out, your mind didn't know that. Your mind didn't have it until you pictured it through with the scenario. And the side benefit of picturing it through with the scenario is that you can plan for being wise about it and not just have it hit you and then make all the traditional mistakes people make when they first make a lot of money. Anyway, so you look at that, you say, I clearly want that. It's clearly better than if I hit 45 and I'm still struggling or just kind of mediocre financially. And certainly acting on that within reason, and you can define what within reason is. Right? As long as I spend a certain amount of time with my family, I get enough sleep. I don't like stress myself out or rush too much or at all. Then yeah, I'd rather do that. I think that would have been exciting for me to build to that and then do it. And then given that, what's a good bet? And then again, you go back to saying, well, at least for the next year, I'm going to focus on making it work like the scheme that I mentioned with some social media, YouTube, maybe Google ranking, depending on what program you're in, and working on some Amazon, right? And just getting to know that enough that you're able to, that it's not like when there's a word called a black box. A black box is like blurry. It's like you look in and you can't see what's inside. It's pretty great for Amazon not to be a black box for people. It's pretty great if you know what it entails. And that way you can decide better the extent to which you want to take advantage of that opportunity. Part of what we do in OMG is give you that opportunity in addition to helping you specialize with your own particular path. And then, anyway, and so you can make it so that whatever goes on in your life, and then you can picture that's going to be true, that you're going to want to focus on this and devote a certain amount of priority and focus to it. And you can ask, well, what if my family wants me to go on vacation? And you can check it against things like that. But once you see it clearly, you say, well, would I rather go on a vacation each year, or would I rather be a millionaire in 10 years? And you could think, well, do I have to choose? Well, you do have to choose if you're stipulating. You see, it's inaccurate thinking to say, well, maybe I don't have to choose. Of course, maybe you don't have to choose, but ask yourself, if you had to choose, if it was a choice. This is often people don't really realize how to use conditional statements, and they're extremely important for clear thinking. And you're just going to be very limited in your ability to plan and motivate yourself, think accurately, and convince other people, persuade. You can have all the other skills and read influence and so forth, but if you can't think in conditionals accurately, then it's a problem. And so what I mean is, thinking incorrectly about conditionals would be to, one way or the other, not think about it so that you acted or thought as if it wasn't a choice. Sorry, as if you didn't have to choose between going on family vacations for 10 years or becoming a millionaire. Of course, it might be the case that you could do both, but you need to be able to at least stipulate something and then find an answer based on the stipulation. So you need to at least be able to consider the question. If it was a choice, now you've stipulated it, so it is, for that mental exercise, it is a choice. Okay? It doesn't matter what might actually happen in reality. I watched this when I was in jury duty selection. It wasn't called to the people that were interviewed, but I was just kind of in the audience. And the lawyer was asking questions based on stipulation. They're saying, if it was the case that such and such was proven, but it isn't what the client's charged with, right? They were charged with like promoting prostitution, but not being a prostitute. He said, what if the defense lawyer was asking prospective jurors, what if the prosecution proved to you that the person acted as a prostitute, but they didn't prove that that they were promoting prostitution, like it's kind of a business or whatever, like making a business of prostitution, whatever that might mean. And then a number of the people, they couldn't process that question. They couldn't understand the idea of a stipulation. They would say, well, I'd have to hear the evidence, or well, I'd have to see, like it. But that doesn't make any sense. If someone stipulates something, you don't have to find out whether what they're stipulating is correct. You're doing a mental exercise. You're not assuming it's correct. You're stipulating it's correct. They're totally different. If I say, if you had to choose between taking family vacations for 10 years or becoming a millionaire, then I'm not having you assume that you can't become a millionaire without family vacations. I'm stipulating it. Assuming it is trying to say that it's true. What we're doing is thinking about, if it were true, then what next? If I said, if you had 2 apples and then you got 3 more apples, how many apples would you have? We could say 5. We wouldn't, right, this is an extreme example of someone not understanding. Most everyone understands stipulation in this case. They wouldn't say, well, I don't know, because maybe you wouldn't give me 3 apples. Or, maybe I wouldn't put my hand out for the apples. Or maybe someone would eat the apples while I was counting, right? That would be ridiculous. But in many cases in life, people actually do that same ridiculous thing when it's not so obvious when it comes to stipulating. As you get some practice with this in your own head, it'll really help you when you're talking with other people and you're looking to persuade them. Because what you often do is you'll stipulate, the other person might assert something that might be in doubt, but instead of fighting against it, you stipulate it, and then you say, okay, well, suppose that's true. Or if that was true, then it's still the case that you would want this, or whatever. Like, let's say a person says, well, I get leads from some other source, right, from my business, and you could say, actually, let's suppose those leads stay the same or even grow a little bit each year. If you could, it's still the case that people are on Google searching for plumbers, right? If you're talking to a plumber, and like there's some number of people that are going to go to someone or some plumber in our city based on a Google search, and no matter where else you're advertising, you're only going to get those people if you're ranked high on Google. And if you have a decent website, when they come, that'll get them to call. Do you want to explore getting that traffic or not? And I'm not saying that in every case that exact phrase would be a great script, but being able to think that way instead of saying, oh, well, like those leads are crap, they got other place, or, oh, you can stop doing that. You accept it. You don't have to fight against things that they're asserting. You stipulate it. Okay, if that's true, then, and then you show how your product or service is still relevant and important, even given what they want to think or what they think is true. So it's critical to think in this way, and this gives a little bit more development to when I talked about this, when I talked about how to know what's true in the kind of the teen webinars in Alchemy, like somewhere around 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and so forth. And then I wrote in this slide, conversion, how do you get yourself to certainty? And that's what that refers back to, I'm talking about how do you make it so that whatever the situation that realistically comes up, either if you're musing about something in your own mind and thinking about and might have doubts potentially, or if the context or circumstances in life and the environment change, how do you still have the same conclusion? How do you still feel sure about something? Including your product or service, right? If you can get to where you're certain about your product or service being helpful, then that's important. But the only way that you're really going to get to certainty, you can try to be manic. You can try to just psych yourself up where everyone needs your product or service by just thinking emotionally, which blurs things, right? But that of course has all kinds of problems. The other way to get to certainty properly is the same way, through stipulations, conditionals, if-then statements. What you do is you figure out who needs your product and why. And if you're not sure at that point, then you probably want to make your product better, right? So you get to certainty by figuring out what conditions have to be true in order for someone to need your product. But then it can be true if you want to find what is it you can stipulate, so then no matter what else, the person needs your product or service. And that's how you can get to total certainty. As long as those things are true, then they need us, right? Like someone needs OMG, right? We could make conditions. If if they have the money to pay for one of our programs without starving, if they're willing to have an entrepreneurial mindset where they're not expecting to just follow orders and obey authority, and then they're entitled to results, right? That's not entrepreneurial, and that's just false, right? Unless it's artificially created by authority figures. And if they're open to doing something of their own business, whatever, we can come up with things. I'm fairly aware of them, but yeah, I mean, essentially, if someone's not going to need money to feed themselves in the next week, we're not going to necessarily show you how to do that. I don't know anyone that can do that unless you have a job. And then if someone's willing to think like an entrepreneur, right? Things like that, then our solution works. We're a reasonable place. Our strength is what people are looking for. Getting yourself in the room with people that are doing it, getting web traffic online. That's always going to help every business, right? Learning how to get web traffic. So no matter what you do in business, then it's going to be helpful. So there we go. And then we have certainty. We feel certain about our program, and then that's effective for selling it. If you're feeling uncertain whether someone should go with you with your product or service, then you just want to create the right conditionals, and then you might need to improve your product. Okay, that builds a certain amount for now that you can use and you can replay and so forth. But I put a lot in here that and what we just talked about that should give you the right questions to ask, that as you work it through scenarios and situations for yourself. A lot of times when I'm saying stuff, if you're thinking, and I'm satisfied with the examples I gave, but often people, it's of course natural to want more examples and more examples. But then what to do is to make your own scenarios and situations and try to apply it to that. And then you'll find that I've given you questions and framing, and it'll make even more sense. With the type of thing I talk about, I can never really make enough sense until you do that for yourself as well. Kind of like if I showed you how to rank a website, then you wouldn't end up with a ranked website until you went and did it, right? So similar with this stuff. You're not going to have a full feeling of closure, like, okay, I got it, until you work it through for yourself. It's possible to teach lessons where someone does get a sense of closure at the end. That's very satisfying for the listener. But this doesn't qualify as one of those topics, at least as well as I know it now. And furthermore, that's actually counterproductive for learning, ironically as well. Okay, I want to give you an indication. I think I can do this fairly quickly, but it's pretty profound when it comes to your product. And then I can round things out on Monday with taking a look through at overall business planning and sort of integrating, let's say, traffic, conversion, product even further, and take a look at meta strategy for business planning and so forth. I'm just giving everyone a second here. A little bit switching gears, although all this is the same general topic. Well, I'll point something out to you here. And what I want to show you here is why it is that you have just no competition, basically, and that anything that you go into, you can pretty much be so far past the competition in so many cases over time that it's really not relevant to worry about competition. You just another thing that reason to read Joy Inc. that I've recommended is this guy has made a software company that I think pretty much most of us or all of us after reading that book would rather go with them than some random software company. It just seems so far past what like a kind of quote unquote normal company would be in terms of their performance and reliability and quality of their product and so forth. And that's in software where there's so many companies, right? And it's such a big field, and yet it was wide open for someone doing what this guy did to do something way better. And that's really the case everywhere you look in life and business life and so forth. And here's why. Suppose you have a plot of land, I wrote here on the slide, and some materials to build a house. And the house is like your product, or you're building it for yourself or somebody else. Then how do you go about things? Well, pretty much everyone you're competing with will just try to build a good house with those materials and maybe some extra materials on that land. And what you can do instead is you can use that plot of land and the materials and whatever as a staging area. You can build a place for yourself there to just get by. And then you can work on finding the location that is given whatever limited resources you have, a terrific one, but where you're kind of starting from scratch. Remember, you're starting with a plot of land here and materials. It's basically being imposed on you, just like in life, including your method of thinking and knowing what's true is imposed on you. The reason my proof for how everyone thinks this way, essentially, where they just build on the land they're given with the materials they're given, and then they'll add to it a little bit. They won't only use the materials they're given, but generally people's idea of constant and never-ending improvement is to improve on this house, on this plot of land. But what people don't do is use what they have to start with as a starter kit, and then build the whole thing from scratch, looking at the problem freshly, or the opportunity in a fresh way, and building from scratch, including the method for the foundation, and then building the foundation, and then building up from there. And my proof of this is everyone does this with their own ability to think and know what's true. Everybody behaves as if the wisest freaking person on earth, I get emotional about this, was you at the age of like 1. Maybe the ages of 1 to 2 or 3, 4, 5, 6, right? When the hell did your method of thinking and figuring out what's true, when did it get installed in your mind? Must have been then, right? Because it never happened later, right? Ever since you can remember, did you spend 10,000 or 20,000 or 30,000 hours figuring out how to know what's true? Or did you absorb it from the world around you? Because people are so good at knowing what's true, right? People are brilliant, right? Right, I pointed out massive errors that people make. They can't even figure out basic morality with property rights. And then the property rights thing, it's not about politics. It's fundamental to every aspect of your life, including not feeling guilty or ashamed. And so much of your motivation is based on this kind of ridiculous piecemeal morality of you're supposed to do this, that, and the other thing, right? These family vacations that you're supposed to take, rather than becoming a millionaire or a multimillionaire. And if you think your spouse is going to like you more for going on family vacations or like you more for becoming a multimillionaire in the right way and behaving smartly as a multimillionaire, probably the multimillionaire is going to work out better for you. And I treat it like a choice. And I chose to become a multimillionaire instead of going on family vacations. But the proof is that when it comes to the very most core foundational thing in life about our method for knowing what's true, people absolutely positively don't build it from scratch. They just try to improve on their ideas and their model for the world from where they started with. And they don't look at their method. They hardly look at their model for the world and instead just want to add knowledge. People might seek to learn and seek to gain knowledge to some degree, at least knowledge of how to accomplish the goals right in front of their face that they want. And that's it. And almost nobody, even people that examine their model for the world, they don't examine their way of knowing. Instead, they'll look and they'll see different perspectives, different religions, different philosophies, and they'll pick the one that really resonates with them, that they feel like that really is true. So they look at different models and pick the one they want. How do they pick the one they want? Because their wisest person on earth was themselves when they were 1. Is that the height of insanity? But that's exactly how people necessarily operate. Not necessarily, but I mean how they must be thinking, right? Because in our, at least since we can remember, we didn't spend 10, 20, 30,000 hours developing a method from total scratch and how to know what's true and how to think. So if we can't remember doing it, and if we behave as if we have such a method, obviously, or else you wouldn't make any decisions ever, right? Every decision you make is based on the idea that you have a model for the world, you have correct ideas in your mind, and that's based on the idea that you had some way to figure out which ideas are correct and which ideas weren't. Just like with your offer toolbox. Every offer you make to anybody is based on the idea that you have an offer toolbox, which is based on the idea that you have a method for building your offer toolbox that's great or satisfactory or whatever. So this idea, our minds by default just don't re-examine foundations. And they fall for sunk cost. So by default, product creation is relative to norms. People talk about, I want to be the best. And I've talked about this before, but I'll reinforce it now. Any thoughts you have about being the best or better than other people, it's so nonsensical if you stop and think about it. I've talked about this. Maybe to solve the problem, you have to be 100 times better. If you're the best cancer doctor, then is that good enough? Very possibly not, right? What if a bunch of your patients are dying of cancer, right? And then in other ways, you don't have to be the best. You don't have to be the best SEO. You don't have to be the best person on the planet at getting web traffic, right? Maybe that person's busy, or your client would never figure out who they are in the first place, and maybe there's no way to even judge that, or maybe they would cost too much, or maybe it's relative to a particular niche, right? Maybe if you specialize, you'll be plenty good at what you're doing. But thinking about norms of other people, it's just so counterproductive. And you don't even know what the heck is normal. How are you supposed to know whether you're the best unless you spend a tremendous amount of focus watching your competition, so to speak, or other people trying to solve the problem and judging them. And then you have confirmation bias that they're crappy, right? If you're trying to be better than other people, doesn't that mean you're biased in favor of them being crap? Which means it's actually harder to learn from them than if you weren't worried about it, right? You can actually learn more from other people trying to solve the same problem. In other words, what you might think of as your competition, when you're not trying to worry about what the hell is normal or what's better or best or worst or what. So it blocks your ability to learn. It gives you confirmation bias that you're better and they're worse. It screws up your ability to make a good product on several different levels. Again, you don't learn, and you're biased, and you don't want to look at problems with your own product or things that could. You might look at things that can make it better, but not if those things are foundational. Not if those things involve identifying something really wrong with it right now. In most cases, but most everybody, virtually everyone you'll ever meet, does think that way in terms of norms. They don't even realize it. It took me forever to figure it out. And I was looking and looking and thinking in a pretty good method that I developed. And it still took me a hell of a long time. So all of your so-called competition is thinking in terms of norms, which massively handicaps them. They're like cripples compared to you if you don't think this way. They're so far, can't compete with you. Even if you wanted to compete with them, it's not even close. This gives you such a massive advantage if you stop worrying about norms. That's all. Just that. And then sunk cost, and both of these will allow you to build a method for building a foundation, build the foundation, and build up from there. And then your improvement can happen on 3 different levels. You can improve on your method for building. You can improve your building, and then you can just get actual materials or build an actual thing. Just like with your offer toolbox, you can get better at the idea of building your offer, which is what we talk about. If you're wondering what does that mean, everything I talk about in Alchemy is that deepest thing. Where's that slide that I had that? Here. If you say, what's your offer toolbox method, anything we talk about in Alchemy is basically a good place to look for that. Same thing with the knowing method. We covered that as well in earlier in Alchemy. And everything I talk about involves this as well on some level. So people do a little bit of working on their toolbox and mostly work on the offers, as I've talked about, or they're a little bit on their ideas and model for the world, and then mostly on their thoughts and actions. A little bit out of the box, a little bit mostly in the box, struggling, all right? And instead you need a method for understanding boxes, for understanding frames. You see, there's your opportunity in life. There's your automatic win. There's your inevitable success and massive power. Or you have the same power, but you're actually using it in the right place. Is another way to think about it. Is your method for understanding frames. These are like frames. This is like boxes, conceptual boxes. In a sense. and then like this is what like goes in the box. So the material that makes up the box is different than what's in the box, the contents of the box, right? Or the definition of the box. The name of a folder on your computer is different than the contents of the folder, right? You want to have the right folders, and then you fill it with stuff. Anyway, regardless of how I kind of dramatize it or give kind of those example type things, the basic idea is you need to understand about how categories work, about how words work, about how frames work, about how conceptual boxes work, and how to think about those and get them right. Then you can build the right boxes. And then you can get the right stuff. Then those accumulate the right things inside the boxes, kind of almost automatically. So as you learn to focus here on the offer toolbox method, on how to build your foundation, and it's a natural question when I say this, well, David, so what do you mean by building your foundation for your offer? Well, again, everything I talk about is that. I've already been explaining that. Once you ask that question, then everything else I say will make sense. Right? Not that it's not already making sense, but so you take this plot of land and the materials, and you use that as a staging area. You take your current model of the world and your thinking and the ideas that you've absorbed, and use that to survive, and use that maybe as some raw materials and so forth, or potential whatever. But then you go and figure things out from scratch. That's what you're meant to do, and life becomes really easy when you think that way. It's not about just having someone present different conceptual boxes and saying, hey, look, you're in this box. Let's have this different box. Here's alternative medicine. Here's a different way of thinking about politics or religion. And you say, oh, that feels right, or that's right. Oh, I like that. Now I'm out of the box. Now I'm open-minded. But it's not enough just to be presented with different boxes and pick the one you want. You need the method by which to pick the right box in life. That's where you're all set. All right? So you have this plot of land and you use materials and you build a place to live, while first you figure out, well, how do I choose the right plot of land? What do I need? What's the nature of that? So you think about how you don't even just choose the best plot of land or the one that you want or the one that suits you for your final house or the next house you're going to build. Instead, you think about what's your method for choosing the right plot of land. And that might involve choosing another plot that you build a house on, and that might not be the final product. That might not be the final house you build. You might learn from doing that. If you start thinking, oh, okay, I'm going to use this current plot and materials as a staging area in order to build my final product, and that's my last stand, and I better get that right, then you'll be paralyzed. Right? If you get it perfectly right, you'll know it when that'll reveal itself when something's perfect. Until then, you can build successive houses, so to speak, on new plots of land, and you'll at least learn and gain understanding as you do it. And each time you'll have a better place to live, probably, right, anyway. In practice, with a product or service, you can build a better and better product or service, and then you can use that as your next launching pad to build the next thing. So you never need to get too stressed out. You're building your understanding. You're building your method for getting better at picking the right plot of land and building the better house. So if you just look at your product that way, I'll give you another little angle on sunk cost just to kind of illustrate it. Is when people are thinking about whether to sell a stock, one of the natural questions that they'll ask themselves or someone will ask them is, well, what did you buy it at? Well, what the hell does that matter? Right? If you're thinking about whether to sell stock, then it's only going to mess up your decision making to think about what price you bought the stock at. Right? The only thing that's relevant is anything that might help you figure out whether it's going to go either up or down in the future, or whether you're just better off not having your money in stocks for other reasons because of the nature of how stocks move. But it has to be based on things that are relevant for the future. And what you bought the stock at isn't relevant. The only reason it might be relevant is have to do with maybe tax liability or savings. But as long as it's you're using it for a reason that that's actually helping your decision. But otherwise, sunk cost doesn't help. People talk about like, oh well, I've gone to college for 3 years. Should I finish it? Well, you should finish it if it's going to help you. But the fact that you've been there for 3 years doesn't matter a hill of beans, right? The sunk cost is not relevant, and the minute you take into account, it's going to screw up your decision making. But the more people use a foundation, no matter how bad it is, the more sunk cost they end up behaving like they have, right? Regarding that that foundation. The older you are, the more you don't want to believe that you have had really terrible ideas. I don't mean overall, I don't mean net, okay? But even if you have all sorts of wonderful ideas, even if you've done wonderful things your whole life for people and yourself, if there's any really bad ideas that have hurt yourself and others, then you want to figure out those things and switch them around, right? But the older people get, presumably, the more sunk cost they have, the more they've used their foundation, their method for knowing, the harder it can be to change things. And then just with anything with product, the more people have invested in their current product or things related to the product, the more it can mess up your decision making if you take into account. So you want to fully ignore sunk cost and norms. All of your so-called competition is going to be very strongly influenced by that. They're going to want to justify why they're already good. I can't tell you how many people in our so-called niche, I don't think of myself as being in any niche, but the so-called niche that OMG might be in, and I over-deliver and our product is so good and all that, and they're just trying to convince themselves that it's so good. Tons of products are not scams, they're not fraudulent, they're fine. But the results that we get with people at OMG are just in a different place. And because I never worried about being better or worse than someone else, I just tried to solve the issue at hand. Right? We're trying to set people up for success, give people an advantage for success. I can't make sure people are successful, so I let go of that. But what I can do is create a context that's most amenable to success with the resources that I reasonably have. Right? I can't necessarily make the best possible context if I was a trillionaire and had 500 hours in a day and 10,000 perfect angels working with me, right? Then maybe I can make something better. But given the resource that I have, then I'm focused on solving the problem or maximizing the opportunity, whatever. And that's it, right? I have the vision or the idea, trying to create a place with OMG that, given the resources that we have, is best for people's, when I say that, again, not best compared to other people. I just mean that I'm trying to use the resources I have in order to solve the problem, solve one particular problem, or help people with one thing, an advantage, an acceleration towards success. And relative to who is using it, right? If I was only accepting 5-year-olds to a program like OMG with the same general problem or opportunity of wanting to set them up for success, then it would be designed differently, right? So it's relative to the user. There's a story in Joy Inc. about they were developing a touchpad thing, diagnostic tool for, I think it was mechanics that worked on buses or something to use. And then they went in the field, which is what they do. They have these people work for them they call high-tech anthropologists. And so in addition to software programmers, it's a business that makes software, right? Software solutions customized for businesses. Sorry, they're not called Joy Inc. They're called like Menlo or something. But the book is Joy Incorporated, Joy Inc. And in addition to having software programmers, they also have people that they call high-tech anthropologists that go out in the field and take a look at the end user and their situation. And they noticed they were wearing gloves when they were doing their mechanic work. And the original plan called for like a thermal screen, like I think is normal on like an iPhone or something like that. And instead, they by going out in the field and seeing the actual user that'd be using it, that the whole thing that they made wouldn't have worked. It would have had to be discarded or redone. By going out and realizing about the user, then they were able to make something that was based on pressure rather than thermal. So however you want to look at it, you want to take a look at the user, both in terms of framing for the sales presentation and then also for the product and so forth that you're making. So you're matching it to them. If you're doing client work, then you want to be thinking, what's the real problem that my user might have? One is that they just don't know who's going to be reliable. Like there might be so much they don't know about someone that a digital marketing agency person might do for them, right? Like if it's about ranking on Google, they might not know who's going to be effective. It's like if you need a lawyer, then you just don't know who's going to be a good lawyer, right? And that's part of the problem, is they don't know that. So merely saying I can get your website ranked on Google doesn't solve a whole bunch of their actual problems, because one of the problems is they can't tell who's good and who isn't, and they're worried about that. And then they don't know if being ranked on Google is going to get them visitors to their website necessarily, because what does that mean? What keywords or what? And then they don't know if visitors are going to translate to phone calls, and if those phone calls are going to translate to business. Possibly. And so maybe that means you only appeal to people that do know all that and just know that they want to be ranked on the top of Google, or that they want a YouTube video to be ranked in YouTube search engines or on Google for them, or whatever it might be. Or it might be that you specialize and cater to the user who doesn't know a lot of that stuff, and you create a system and a product and a program that appeals to them and works for them, and that helps build their confidence and take them in slowly and help them see progress and even keep their costs down until they can see if it can really help them over time, right? So you can specialize in different ways that way, or solve a problem for different types of people that might look the same. They're both business owners who might benefit from getting web traffic or being ranked, their website ranked on Google or whatever, but very different people. One who knows confidently that if he's ranked high on Google, that's all he needs, and another who has a bunch of other needs about not knowing how it'll work for them and so forth. Each of them might need a different product, service in practice, right, that treats them differently. And even is priced differently and so forth. Same thing with OMG. There could be people that can't immediately afford our larger program, or don't have the confidence that knowing that if they got on that program, they could succeed. And so if we have a program that can onboard people in a more gradual way, then that could appeal to those people. And plus, we might benefit in OMG, we might benefit by having people prepared better for our larger program. So that's why we created special ops. But we didn't do it by looking around at our sunk cost or what's normal or what other people are doing or whatever. Nothing to do with my thinking whatsoever. And so focus with your product, including on your sales pitch. This will help you. A lot of product and conversion kind of sales can really go hand in hand. And I'll look to tie that together as best I can on Monday, even further. But shoot, what was I saying here? Oh, when you think about the method that goes into your product or service, like how you make it, how you perform the service, then that'll often be a good way to explain yourself to a potential customer. So thinking in terms of method rather than like you can have the vision. This is what I do also with just success in general and achieving goals. I think, what will the world look like after the problem's solved? What would a satisfied and successful customer look like? And you could have a successful customer for a hamburger, where they're satisfied when they get it and when they eat it, and that, well, satisfaction kind of goes hand in hand, but they eat it and they got the result they were looking for. They got a good eating experience, right, of whatever type. Doesn't even have to involve health, right, if that's what they're looking for. But regardless, you had a satisfied and successful customer. They successfully got the result that they were looking for. And part of it is your sales pitch has them looking for something that you can reasonably fulfill, right? And then they get it. So imagine the world that way. This is like the results formula shortcut that I've talked about in past alchemies. This is the same thing with achieving any goal, but it applies to a product. Is you want to focus on the final scenario after the problem is solved. What you're not doing is focusing like in the middle on the product itself, or on the solution itself, or on hitting the goal itself. Weirdly enough, you're thinking about you're picturing how the world would look if the goal was really hit properly. All right, and then you focus on process and method that is going to get you there. And what we need to take into account in life is that just what people will normally do, related to the same slide here, people are normally kind of capable by default. They look like, I don't know what, 120 degrees in front of them or so, just for the sake of argument. Their process involves improvement as long as it looks like improvement if they just look a little bit to the side a little bit. Like they can have a little bit of building stuff where they're under construction or renovation, or they're making some changes and they have to, but they're not going to look very far in terms of making progress, like to the side or lateral thinking, or what'll feel backwards to them looking at their foundation. When I'm achieving a goal, I'm comfortable with the appearance of no progress for a while, because I'm just building on things that I know. Time is revealing things. I'm doing things that I understand are progress because I'm building my understanding, and so forth. When you're ranking a website, there might not be actual movement during times of the site on Google. And so instead, if you focus on method and process and make sure you're getting that right, and you keep your vision of what the world will look like once you're successful. The reason why that vision is so very important is what did I talk about in previous alchemies? Your mind will by default, it will twist your goal achievement or your end user success with product. It'll twist it into a goal for feedback that it decides is a sign of progress, and it will literally fully lose track of the final vision, and it'll be totally lost. Kind of like with our school system, where actually having successful children, people, adults, has nothing to do, it's fully lost, right? It has nothing to do with the actual motivations of the school system. But that happens on every level with our mind, is we lose sight of our actual objective for real. And it does. It doesn't reward you for, like, it's not relevant. It fully changes your goal into goals for feedback that it thinks is going to reveal progress. In other words, if you're focused on trying to make a good product, then there's a way that's actually going to be ineffective. Of course, there's a way to interpret that, that's correct. But what you want to do is focus on, imagine the problem actually being solved, the opportunity actually being fulfilled for the user, and then focus on the right understanding and process to create the product. And that works great. Instead of somehow focusing on the product itself doesn't really exist, and so you'll end up focusing on feedback that you're getting closer to your goal, rather and kind of hedging your bets on the way and stuff. It's just a very ineffective process, even though it's or way of doing things, even though it's very, very normal. That's how people generally go for goals, is they picture achieving the goal and then their mind twists it to what feedback or milestones along the way and progress, and then they just want that feeling of progress, and they end up doing a bad job with achieving their goal in many cases, unless it was very easy. So that is how you make a great product. You can see how your so-called competition is going to do things all wrong, and they're going to feel like they're doing it all right, and they're going to affirm and be all, yeah, this is great, this is such a good product, and you can run circles around them without even trying. And then you can actually help people or achieve the result that you're trying to achieve, which is nifty too. And your whole life will be easier, things will snowball terrifically for you, and so forth. All right, that wraps up everything. We talked about frames further regarding conversion, and then we talked about how this with the product, where you want to start just by using wherever you're at as a launching pad, a temporary residence, to then build things properly. And if you have to make a decent product that you start with, that's fine. That's like your launching pad. So I'm not saying that you can't make any money until you have everything perfect. I'm saying nothing of the kind. I didn't say raise the land or immediately leave the plot of land that you're on and burn the materials. Right? I said, great. Use them, build a house, and use it as a staging area. Right? Live there for now. Right? So you might make a product or provide a service that's decent. But then, and you may or may not make much money doing that. You might make a significant amount of money doing it, or you might have trouble selling it, just depending on plenty of factors. But then you just keep improving in this way, and don't look in the wrong way and look in the right way, and then you'll inevitably succeed. And it'll be a win-win-win for everybody. Okay, great. That wraps up the monologue. A long talk today. Good thing Michael Monaghan was on his 4th espresso for that. So I'm not sure how long we'll be able to discuss. Maybe I'll do more discussion next time on Monday than average. As Peter Drucker, and I'll refresh this because it needs to be refreshed, but Bryce said, as Peter Drucker said, most people think they know what they're good at. They're usually wrong. More often, people know what they're not good at, and even then, more people are wrong than right. And yet a person can only perform from strengths. One cannot build performance on weakness, let alone on something one cannot do at all. Great, excellent, from Peter Drucker. Thank you, Bryce. This just goes to show that strategy is about looking for the most practical thing you can succeed at. Otherwise, you can waste all your efforts on mediocre results. Good. And I'll read one more thing that Bryce wrote. Talking about conclusions when joining OMG, my subconscious was split with the elephant wanted me to join because I would make quick money, but the rider thought that knowing how the 21st century traffic getting would get me to adapt this new era for client getting. When talking now about the mind, do you think the rider of my subconscious would do it? And the rider is kind of like what people normally think of as themselves, or the main them, the one that's more in control. And it's really the case that the rest of the mind tends to be much more in control because it sets the whole frame, and the rider only gets to operate within a small context. Just like the, but I've given you a somewhat different way to look at it. But let me also give you this illustration again. If I remind you about, if you imagine yourself being a president or a king, but president of a company or whatever, or king of a land, whatever, and then you have advisors, and you can only operate through the advisors, and you get your information in from them, and then you tell them what to do, and they implement it, then that's a little bit like how your mind works. And then what you need to do is realize that if they set the frame and you're just asking questions within the frame and context and the assumption that they set, then it looks like you're in control, but you're only in control of like a little amount within a box, right? And they're in control of the rest. And the way to operate then is to ask them questions that force the frames to get broken until you get to things that, no matter what they say, have to be right or wrong. And then you build back up from there. So you can still do it with talking to the advisors, so to speak. But and this is how you want to operate with your mind, is you have to get outside of all the frames. And that's why I explained to you, look, you're a conscious being. You don't change. You're aware of your consciousness field. You're not in the world of reasons. And when that steps you out of all the different frames and so forth, when you ground yourself in that. And I've talked about stuff related to that at length. But just another thing to think. What did I say then in this about? Right. Like, instead of thinking in terms of the conscious and subconscious, or the elephant and the rider, or elephant and the lawyer, then you want to start to build things that are true, period. And you can do that with stipulating. It makes it easy. And then some things are true. You don't have to stipulate anything. Like who you are, like I said, is true. And the thing about property rights is true. No matter what within our world, within any kind of world where people could have property, that it's true. You know. It doesn't matter if all your advisors are saying you should tax people, right? If you have enough information, like if your advisors were talking to you about the land and you were a king, then no matter what they told you, you could still figure out property rights. That's the kind of thing I mean in life, is no matter what the assumptions are, no matter what your mind's telling you, there's some things you can figure out no matter what, if you keep pushing till you get foundational. Because no matter what they say, it's always going to still carry the implication that people have to own some property. And once you figure that out, then you can compare that against whenever they contradict that. And your mind contradicts itself. But when you figure out things that have to be correct, then you can use that to smash or break or dissolve all the contradictions that are false, or the ideas that are false because they contradict something you know has to be true. By sticking to things like the idea that if something changes, it can't be the same thing, just that one thing knocks out virtually all of what you thought was true. Because most everything that you think is true is based on things both changing and being the same thing. I forced that not to be the case, and it forced me to figure things out that other people haven't realized, or that most anyone hasn't realized. And then by figuring those things out, then I could build back off of that, and so forth. Let me see what Joseph wrote here. This might be a good example. Joseph said, is this on track? And he means like this example I'm about to give. When I don't want to do an activity like getting and building a network site, like a PBN, like as part of a resource for Google search engine optimization. Even though I know, and this is what Joseph wrote again, even though I know intellectually that this is Greg Morrison SEO and a key to ranking, the activity as my mind perceives it and I are not in an us state. It's not like you're not integrated, right? There's different conflicting things. So yeah, what's going on is there's hidden frames and categories that your mind has this activity framed as that that frame it as something you don't really want to do. And you need to dissolve those somehow. I'm trying to think why is it that our mind, like in a case like this of doing a task, one thing is if your mind changes, like I said, your mind's going to constantly change goals that you might have into goals for feedback that it thinks are progress. And if you make a PBN site, you're not going to see, your mind might not have that associated as progress. It doesn't see, so to speak, it doesn't calculate, it doesn't have it encoded in itself, how making a private blog network site is directly on the path to something it wants. You might think that it does, but like I keep telling everybody, until you walk through the scenario, your mind never did know or have encoded what you thought it might have had encoded. So it literally doesn't have it encoded as a step along the way to a goal. If it did have a task encoded properly, as we could say metaphorically, if your mind doesn't see properly that a particular task is on the way to a goal that it wants, then it'll make you feel like not doing it because it's just a waste of resources to itself. If it does see that it's directly on the way to something that it itself wants, then it will make you feel motivated. So you know for sure that it doesn't see it, it doesn't calculate, it doesn't have it associated properly, encoded properly on the way. And not just as a possible thing on the way, but maybe there's some other better way. You need to use the law of non-contradiction and show there is no other way than doing a PBN. And you might say, well, David, what if there is some other way? Well, you could say if there's no other better way than you know, what's the alternative? That you go and figure out search engine optimization from scratch, and figure out some other way, or to go with what Greg's showing that is based on massive research, years of experience, and tons of proof, right? And results. Then which of those is the preferred choice? You figure it out from scratch or following Greg? You put it that way to your mind, and the choice is it's clear. It shows the opposite's absurd, right? The opposite of following what Greg is showing is absurd. Obviously, that is your best path to getting to the result, but you have to walk through the whole way. And again, your mind has the activity framed as basically useless, and so you don't feel like doing it. So again, when you look in terms of frames, this is what I'm trying to figure out how to explain, and this helps me to do it. But this stuff is ingrained in my thinking. I understand it really well, and then it's just a question of how I best explain it within an hour or something like that. Joseph wrote, from there I asked the question, what needs to be in place, the frame, for me to want to do the activity? Is that right? That's right. I got ahead of myself a little bit by talking after your first paragraph, but then Joseph wrote, in this scenario, I don't feel confident in my abilities of getting the correct network site. I don't thoroughly understand the steps. Okay, good. So the other thing is your mind has it framed as like a black box, as like something you're unsure of. And then maybe what your mind wants is certainty. It wants a sense like definitely this is the activity that has the most payoff, the most impact. And then now stipulate. Stipulating is so powerful. What you can stipulate here is, look, I can't know for sure. I can't get perfect certainty no matter what about what activity I can do next to work on my client's site or work on a website I'm trying to rank or build my resources for SEO. So you start by stipulating that you can't know that for sure. By stipulating that, you get rid of your mind looking around for a way to know for sure. You say, look, no matter what I do, I can't know for sure. So since I can't know for sure, now I need to have my best guess. And now, I've already watched the training. I've asked Greg some questions. Or maybe I say, oh, wait a second, I can get on Greg's office hours and just check something with him. Maybe that's the best thing. Or I can do both. Or then you can say another thing I can do is just get started. We make pretty sure that we give you ways that you can try stuff, Joseph, in OMG, where you're not going to blow yourself up forever by doing something where you're trying to learn something. So when you think, when you're working with your brain, you're working through the scenario here, you say, all right, I can't know for absolute certain, so how do I build my certainty? How do I build my knowledge and confidence and so forth? Well, how about if I go start doing it, right? Then that seems like maybe a good way. And then I can ask Greg a question. Maybe Greg's office hours aren't for a couple days or several days. And so how about if I do both? Can I both ask Greg a question on his office hours and can I get started? Yeah. And if I get started, I'll probably have better questions, right? And then you just keep going through until the activity that you intellectually see makes sense is you work through the scenario until it gets framed so that the issues disappear, and you realize that it's absurd. What do you need to feel confident in your ability before you get started, right? So you can prove the opposite once again, and then you can look at this in life and say, wow, I actually have a belief in my mind that I need to feel confident in something, at least in some or all cases. I need to have a feeling of confidence before I even get started. How the hell am I supposed to learn anything or get good at anything if I already need to be confident? That means I'm restricted to whatever I already feel confident about in life, and I can't get outside of that. So you dissolve that whole idea. It's a ridiculous idea that's holding you back. And you picture it as, how about if I build my confidence by realizing that I focus on what I know and I keep letting it reveal from there? It's so powerfully ingrained in us. I'm telling you, this way of trying to achieve goals, our mind just does it by default. We have to confront our default. We can't, when I tell you about how default works, you need to see it. You need to not think that you don't operate this way. You need to realize it is going to be the case unless you make a real change. And it's not going to happen by willpower. You have to build it. And by default, our brain wants to feel confident and feel like it's making progress. Again, it's going to reframe the goals that you have into a feeling of feedback, into a feeling of what progress is. You got to stop trying to make progress in life fully. The whole idea of making progress, except if you're building understanding, if you're successively revealing, if you're building on what you know, but any other sense of progress is horribly counterproductive. It's basically insane. You have a vision for what your final thing should be, the final way that this particular topic or particular problem is solved, how the world will be, and then you just keep building based on what you know. And reasonable guesses are fine. You just you do something, and you're not hoping that the guess works out, because that's trying to make progress to the back door. Of course, you're making progress if you're building your understanding. If you're building your method, then you don't have to worry about it if you're building your toolbox or your offer. The rest will automatically happen if you focus on building your understanding. That's why it's so profound. If you focus anywhere in life other than on building understanding in the way that I'm explaining, then instead you're trying to make progress, and you're in the wrong place. If you focus on building understanding, you're using your power to the max, life becomes easier and easier, things get solved, solutions reveal themselves, and you feel confident because it's based on method, not based on your self-image or that you can already do something. You see? Excellent. Great, great. I can stop my rant. Joseph got me off of it. But hopefully that helps you to see. And this is why I'm doing Alchemy twice a week. This is why I'm doing 30 of them total. It's all about one core idea. It's focusing on building your understanding rather than what feels so right and natural with making progress, believing that you're already so smart, already can do it. That you see how the self-image thing came in the back door, Joseph, and held you back. Is you needed to feel like you're already smart and already good in order to take your next step forward. And I've been saying that for weeks and weeks. But I agree. That's why again, that's why 30. That's why it's like 3 hours practically every time. Is because I don't think it's easy, and I don't blame anyone for not getting it. I'm not on anyone. You shouldn't feel bad about anything, right? That's literally, it's always a red flag. There's no guilt or shame or anything. As a matter of fact, you're here. We're working on it. It's amazing. But it's so hard. It's so counterintuitive in a certain way to realize what I'm saying about understanding and to get over trying to believe that you're already smart and needing to believe you're already smart and good and competent in order to move forward in life. It's so counterproductive, but it's the only reality for people. And it's so horrible to be locked into that. And I just want the horrible suffering of that to end for you guys and the ripple effects of the effects it has on others. And I don't mean people don't have some happiness in life. I know that. But it's just such a burden to live life that way, and it's so ineffective compared to realizing you could just focus on building understanding, and that's it. You only have to get that one thing, and then everything else falls into place. It's the one paradigm shift. It's the fundamental paradigm shift, and then all the other paradigm shifts can fall into place after that. Especially since I've given you a zillion answers that'll make sense even more after that. Yeah. Good, Bryce. You like that from before? All those leads are crap. So true. Rick says, norms and sunk cost. This is pure gold, David. I'll be rewatching this and applying this to everything. Wonderful. Yeah, isn't that great? I mean, yeah, and that's just totally what people will do by default regarding a product, is they're looking at what other people are doing and trying to be better or the same or not too much worse. And they're worried about whether and profit from your passion. It can be correct. That phrase isn't automatically wrong, but the way I think people normally interpret it is with the sunk cost fallacy in the wrong way, of where, hey, you don't need to rebuild your foundation, you don't need to rebuild anything, you can profit from what you've already sunk your cost into. And of course, that's a wonderful message people love to take. Oh, that's wonderful. That's great, right? It'd be super easy to sell a product based on taking advantage of a number of these fallacies. I just don't do it that way myself. But there's all sorts of things that would appeal to people. But profit from what you already love, right? Well, maybe you don't love anything that's going to be of enough value to other people, and maybe you need to rebuild your entire foundation. But the great news is when you look at product creation that way and monetization that way, then you're doing it in a way that's going to snowball for you, and it's inevitable that you'll be very successful. Makes sense as I'm realizing this now. Excellent. Yeah, about the sunk cost and the norms. Excellent. Cynthia said, I quit being a normal doctor years ago. Excellent. Changing comes with a huge price. Yeah, especially in something that's such a strong system as the medical system that imposes such a system with such incredible rewards, right? It really rewards you for staying within it. The world in general rewards you on the surface with staying within the system. It's tough to build outside of it, but then it gets really easy. So it's like the local peak thing, where you get stuck on one local peak, and it's really tough because you have to go through a valley to get to the higher peak, but it's great if you go through the valley, get on the right peak where you can climb much higher, and then life becomes much easier and better. But I love my conversion, Cynthia said. Lots of criticism, but I expanded my toolbox with alternative health solutions and with better results. Congratulations, Cynthia. That's so wonderful. It's so awesome. Still not the best, but you don't need to be the best, right? You just need to solve the problem. And I prefer not to be the best. I'd rather someone was 10 times better at figuring out and explaining alchemy than I was. That would be terrific. Especially when you realize you only need a finite amount of money in life, not infinite. Right? Then if someone's better than you at a problem that really needs solving, then the problem can get solved. It's pretty great. But way better than my previous self. See, that's wonderful. Right? You're much happier now, and things will get easier and easier. If only you knew. That is Pioneer. They see normal as the barrier that keeps us from seeing the vision that something greater must exist. You, Cynthia, might be a pioneer if you only knew. Yeah, Cynthia is really, really working on making some things work that are tough. Thank you for doing that, Cynthia. Matt says, yes, thank you for offering special ops and alchemy, wonderful onboarding program for a client like me. You're very welcome. I remember, I mentioned that earlier about creating special ops. Matt Corlett said, holy F again. Hear that sound? It's my mind exploding. Major breakthrough, the problem I've had around a product. Wow, thank you, David. Oh, that's terrific. Mind blown again, thank you. You'll have to tell me exactly what I said to spark that. People listening can just rewind it 20 minutes from now and see. Number 6 now. That's funny, mind blown. Suzanne said, mind blown again. Thank you, David. Andrew said, thanks so much, David. I'm going to replay and replay. It's really hitting me home about the mind losing track. Oh, good, of the vision. Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, you have to embrace that that's going to happen by default, so you reframe things so the default changes. If you reframe things foundationally, the default can change. But you can't change the default through like willpower inside the box, right? Like you can't just say, I've made a decision and things are going to be different from now on. You can make a decision to seek understanding and things could be different because you're building understanding. Like you can make a decision to find a way out of the box. This is a great way to put it. You can make a decision to find your way out of the box and then keep acting on that, and that can get you out of the box, reframe, and can get you all the way to foundational and build up from there. And that can start with a decision, but you can't make a decision to be out of the box. You can't make a decision to not make assumptions anymore. You can't make a decision to be foundational from now on. You can make a decision to keep seeking foundations, or to, does that make sense? Just keep seeking and building what's correct. But you have power each moment to seek understanding, and that is your power as a conscious being of what's good, important. You can really just call it seeking understanding of what's important, because important involves what has the most impact for what's good. And it's the one thing your mind really won't do well by itself. Understanding frames all the way to the foundation is always important, because how can you can never know that you're on the right track or that you're doing the right thing unless you understand the context. Remember, you don't have to pick all your battles in life. You don't have to understand everything about everything. But it's not that hard to spot what's important if you just look for it. You're very welcome, Suzanne. I'm so glad this was helpful. The concrete examples you build for us, David, of what you might say to a client in a particular scenario and explaining foundationally why you say it and how you got there. Then with that understanding, it's possible for us to take a current client situation and apply the same method to know how to frame it for that client in that instance. Great. So being able to use the raw materials and try out what you're teaching is the key to building another important tool, and an offer toolbox. Right, sometimes I'll give you a script, I'll give you a situation, and you can kind of you can break down the raw materials from it and apply it to your situation. That's great. I'm glad that I've done that for you sometimes. I always like to have more examples than I even have, but I think I did give a number of illustrations in this webinar. I always wish I was even more clear and was even more certain, that I was explaining things in a way that was clear. I know, and there's plenty of 5-minute segments that I'm sure I could totally rework if I knew more or whatever. But looks like overall we're doing well. Robbie says, haven't really used many stipulations consciously, and on the lawyer example you used helped clear that up. Good, yeah, exactly. It's kind of poignant in that example where they were saying, about the prostitution, if it was proven that that this woman was a prostitute, but it wasn't proven that she was what's it called, promoting prostitution, then would you convict her? And that people couldn't even handle that question in a lot of cases. Some could, but others couldn't even figure out what, the idea of stipulating. Is it critically important for thinking to understand and use stipulation? And remember that word arbitrary. It's critically important to start to spot more and more all these times when you're confident or you feel sure about something, or even if you're making an argument that you're thinking of making an argument, but if you look at it, it's not based on anything solid. I point that out with like professors, right? Oh, and even when I talk about the tests, like teaching for like making up your own tests, it feels so right that you can even do it in my general niche. There's a business, at least one. There's probably others, but at least one, and it's a clever business model if you're not really worried that much about helping people, and they even help people to some degree, but I doubt to the degree that we do. But they'll like do these various certification courses for this, that, or the other thing. But what a great thing. It really takes advantage of what people currently expect, right? You make your own certification, and so you teach people a course on like doing paid advertising or Google pay-per-click, and then at the end you give people a test based on what you taught them, and if they pass the test, then they get certified. And they feel good, and everyone feels good, and that's great. But if you look at that, it's actually based on nothing. It looks like it's based on something solid. But if a teacher can make up his own test, or even if you remove it by one more step, someone else makes up the test, and the teacher teaches about the information on the test and you can pass it, people genuinely think that they accomplished something there. And that's extraordinary. It might coincidentally, like someone might happen to have accomplished something or learned something they might use in doing that process, but if so, it's kind of by coincidence, so to speak, or it's not because of the test or whatever. As far as alchemy, if I get your mind racing, you start asking more questions or new types of questions, then we've succeeded. Okay, and it's not about if I can give you a bunch of answers that you can answer. Watched a video on what a physics engine is, and that really helped me see what a scenario is and do them more complete. Oh, that's so cool! A video on what a physics engine is. That's terrific. I agree. I've talked about that, right, and previously, and how you can just create like physics from scratch, right? People, in general, people believe as part of the typical worldview that like gravity actually is something that can cause stuff and do stuff. That it's like a force that it's so crazy, it's so normal that it might even wonder what the heck I'm talking about when I say this. But gravity doesn't do anything any more than it does something in a physics engine in a game or for a computer simulation of some sort. There's no gravity inside the computer program. Like you can program in gravity into the code, but gravity doesn't exist independently from the code doing stuff and like making stuff happen, right? It's just a regularity that you program in. It exists as a regularity that, again, that's programmed in, but it doesn't have like independent power. But people actually believe that gravity in real life or in the physical world has independent power of its own to do stuff. And that we don't need God because gravity can do stuff, and electromagnetism can do stuff, and elements and atoms just exist all by themselves. It's kind of funny. Once you see it properly, it's kind of funny. Otherwise, it's so normal that I might seem weird just saying what I'm saying. Or like thinking that pixels are self-existent, right? They just exist in and of themselves, and then someone just puts them on the computer screen or brings them over, moves them over to the computer screen. Matt said, that is so incredibly true. How can you ever learn anything if you don't start anything because you're not confident, right, you see? Apply this to dating, right, or to making money. People think that they have to see themselves making money in order to see some results, even if it's a little bit, and then they say, if I could just do that, then I can keep going, then I can believe and keep going. Well, that actually isn't effective. What is effective is to get you around, or that person around, someone that is making money and see over their shoulder. That can be effective. And not to exactly necessarily duplicate, but to break that down into the raw materials. And not even fully raw materials, just break it down a little bit into some parts that you can reassemble for yourself that work. That's hugely effective. And that, in real life, that's what causes people to be successful, is they can like get in a room with and see over the shoulder of someone that's doing something successfully. And then they can try to copy it, but they copy it in order to kind of break down some materials from it and reassemble it so it's appropriate for themselves. That's what helped Mike and myself become successful, like originally with online stuff in a sense. Now, you can't always do that, and then you just build for yourself, and you get some success, and you build the best you can. But if we look at from dating, again, the problem with wanting to see success is it ends up just being a justification for wanting to see feedback that looks like you're doing well. And and you can see in dating how incredibly counterproductive that is. It makes somebody, if they want feedback that they're doing well, that means they're very easily manipulated. It means they appear self-conscious, right? Self-absorbed, superficial, etc. Right? So it's very counterproductive, even while they're thinking that it's helpful. Brian said, when I had 20 acres off-grid on a steep slope to build on, I located the 3 most optimal building sites relative to road access, slope, sun exposure. Oh, right, and even that starter land that I use in the example, just living on that land a little bit, it helps you to understand what you want, right, in land. This is great, though. Great real-life example. Then I built the first house quickly on the second best site to get established. But it was an incredible learning experience. Now I can look at my first website, the same form, and build more sites on what I learn, experience and results and setbacks in the first, and successive sites by progressively learning or doing. Thanks, David. Yeah, wonderful. And never stop. What I mean is, what people can do is after they do that a little bit, and we see this in young children too. A young child learns so well. Everyone learns to walk and talk, and why? Because they do it just right. They keep on working at it until they get it without being self-conscious and trying to believe they already can do it. Right? They're not trying to protect their self-image when they're learning to walk. They just are trying to learn to walk, and lo and behold, everyone succeeds. But things that are just as easy or way easier than learning to walk, by the time people become young adults or adults, they can't do those things. Or in practice, they could, but they don't. Even though they're far easier to accomplish than learning to walk. Because why? This whole self-image thing. They feel like they need to already be good at it in order to get started. Or else it'll demolish their self-image, and that's their actual goal in life, is to believe that they're already smart and good. And that's like it. That's like they'll spend everything on that, including restricting the heck out of themselves and impoverishing the heck out of their lives just to be in this self-image trap. And they don't like it, but they can't see a way out. And between seeking understanding and getting out of that self-image trap, that's my kind of full vision for you for alchemy, and everything else is just kind of details and smoke and mirrors or examples of, I'm kidding about the smoke and mirrors, but examples and applications and so forth, but just to accomplish those 2 things. And then, because all the rest is kind of inevitable if you can deal with either, and either one of those can get you to the other, the self-image thing and the seeking understanding thing. Building on what you know and so forth. And you can never know your self-image. It's just, you can understand method. You can figure out methods that are correct and base your self-understanding on that. Oh, but I was saying that what someone will do is they'll do what you're doing. They'll build 1, 2, or 3 houses, but then they'll feel like, okay, now I just need to be done. Now I'm the expert. Now I want to believe that I've already gotten it after 3 tries or after I built 3 times. And then they go right back into the wrong pattern. And then life spirals downward. And I don't even mean keep building. Even constant and never-ending improvement isn't necessarily the case. But what you need to do is get things foundational. So there's a way out. You don't always have to. Now we might always build more good stuff after we get foundational. But we're not outracing waste. When you get to the foundation of anything, you're not outracing waste anymore. But even with building sites or building houses, you can figure out how to do them at a certain point where you don't need to get better at certain things, practically speaking. If they work, if you hit your target, right? Again, you don't have to make everything perfect. You can perfectly hit a target. You can perfectly get over a threshold. You can get good enough at building websites where you don't need to get better at certain aspects of building the website anymore. But what you don't want to do is feel like now you should have it all good, but then things fall apart and you don't want to try again because now you're too dejected, because that only happens. You didn't have your foundation right, but you wanted to believe that you did. Things fell apart because you didn't have your foundation right, and you don't have the understanding about the situation to keep going. Until and unless you get your foundation right about various things, they are by bad luck and they can fall apart. Something won't necessarily fall apart, even if the foundation's not just right, but it might. Anyway, you can take all that into account. Cynthia said, thank you, David. Excellent building understanding. That's why I'm here. Beautiful. And once you totally have your mind reframed where that's progress, then it's so easy to just feel confident, calm, and actually be very effective. So you'll be much more effective in life than someone who isn't operating that way. And it's pretty easy to be calm, confident, and happy because you can always make progress. You can always build your understanding. You can't be blocked from it. And it's the most powerful progress you can make. So you can't be blocked, and you're moving forward in a powerful way constantly in life anyway. It's just an illusionary trap that to not build understanding and to try to get feedback that you're making progress otherwise. No guilt, no shame. You want prize of that, yeah? I'll take a side of understanding with a pitch of client. That's great. Robbie writes, we're maybe going a little bit into the lightning round here. We'll see. But Robbie writes, my mind still jumps all over the place and brings up past memories and all sorts of other stuff to think about when I'm trying to picture scenarios. One thing to let go of, that's okay. You don't need to vividly picture without your mind wandering. When I'm doing a webinar, I'll lose track of my threads here and there. There's probably several threads that I started opening and that I never did close. So just what you want to do, that's why I talk about have a sense of your vision, that at least with a particular overall, like what's going on kind of right now with the major projects or major things in your life. And then your mind's going to wander and jump around, and it's okay. You don't have full control over your mind. Maybe there's some ultimate way to get there, but right now you start out let's say you start out without full control over your mind, and it's going to be that way for a long time. But you can keep making wonderful progress. Just like you don't go in one step from realizing that you want to get the wrong ideas out of your mind and build more right ideas, and then the next moment you haven't gotten rid of all the wrong ideas, right? So that's all okay. But then that's why you have your vision in mind, and you realize that it's not about feedback. Don't let the vision get twisted. And that way you can always just get back to the vision and get back to the scenario that you're working on, and you'll make progress that way. So it's very parallel to, I think, meditating, where the idea of meditating is when a thought comes, you just acknowledge it and let it go. As opposed to when a thought comes, you say, damn it, I can't control my mind. Crap, I'm not meditating. This sucks. Darn it, what's wrong with me? Right? You see what I mean? You don't let it become a whole problem. You don't beat yourself up worse because of it. You just get back on track. And so all you need to do if your mind is wandering is get back on track. The other thing you can do, though, is part of what you can do in life is declutter more and more. And realizing you can create your own offer. Most of the clutter in your life comes from offer that's been imposed on you that you've accepted, right? And then, of course, the property rights, individual property rights, respecting that can greatly help you declutter, because so much of it has like a moral component attached to it that you can let go of. Megan Lee wrote, wow, so amazing to keep it so simple to one fundamental paradigm shift, to build understanding no matter what it is in life. Yep. To seek understanding of what's important is another way to put it. Nothing wrong with build understanding, but I'm just giving another phrasing. To seek understanding of what's important, about what's good. That's a concept I can keep in mind all the time, right? See? That's the decluttering. You keep that one vision ultimately, and then you can have like sub-visions for projects that you're working on and so forth. But then even if those projects are if you ever have doubt about a project that you're working on, it's easy because you can think of your overall vision of seeking understanding and then align it with that and make sure it is. That's a great starting place. First thought, first question. Amen, hallelujah. That's right. Couldn't have said it better myself, Megan. Beautiful. Pete says, people only say that profit from your passion. People only say that, profit from your passion, because they don't know how to change goals that are installed in their brains at any given time. Right, yeah, you want more flexibility than having to profit from where you're already at, right? And you can try to decently take into account what you might naturally like to focus on as part of what you're trying to build value with. But you use it to kind of help accelerate you rather than restrict you. Just skipping real quick for a moment here. Faith wrote, I will be listening to this again. So key not to look at what others are doing and try to be better. Yeah, that's such a key, right? It makes life so much easier. And I think I made a good case for how it's effective, too. So it's easier and more effective. But to start from scratch to solve the problem. And, of course, starting from scratch, you can pull in all sorts of raw materials, but you kind of define it from scratch or look at the thing from scratch. And then you can solve things really quickly, often much faster. Sometimes people will come to me, like even people I work with or whatever, over the years, they'll kind of come to me with a solution they already have in mind to an issue, and in practice it'll often it'll be kind of pulled as a template from a previous thing that worked, and really it'll just end up being a half an hour of having to get the person to look at things from scratch, and then we solve the problem fast. So it's weirdly faster just to solve to look at things with a fresh mind, have a fresh space, because in seconds you can pull in things that are effective, but you want to first identify what you want in that fresh space, and then you can import stuff really quickly once you start fresh. But if you start with a kind of confirmation bias of wanting to use a solution that worked in the past, it'll kind of mess everything up, essentially. So you want to kind of define the space or think of things freshly and from scratch. Kind of do that, like thinking about what it is you want and what your vision is. Do that without importing stuff, and then you can import stuff after that. But don't be having like templates or biases in mind while you're defining the vision that you want. Same thing could work for a romantic relationship and be kind of easy to picture that way. Think about what really would be happy. People pull in all sorts of templates to help define what they think would be a nice, happy marriage, and it could be much worse. That vision, even though nicer than most, can be much worse than what it could actually be like, right? Probably people could fit in an extra hour of massage on average a day, back and forth between the two partners. If they actually thought about things in a smart, fresh way, then the only reason I think people aren't doing that is template thinking. Kind of a simple, obvious example of just how easy it is to get things right or have a better offer than somebody else. Vincenzo wrote, "Hi David, sometimes alchemize. Sometimes I can alchemize very successfully, but most times I alchemize, I cannot get away from the gray area feeling right. If I take too extreme both ways, feel wrong. And I find the law of non-contradiction is very hard to use. I don't know what I'm contradicting." Interesting. We try to think of a scenario to put that in. If you make no money, that's no good. If you make a lot of money, you don't necessarily need a lot of that. There's plenty of times in life, Vincenzo, where and this relates to what I've said about targets and thresholds, actually, this might help you. If you, maybe what you're missing is thinking about hitting a target or a threshold more as a more kind of front and center part of your strategy. It's the same thing even with property rights. Like, remember, I point out that we own some property. Morally speaking, it must be the case that people own some property, right? Because the opposite of that's absurd. If people own no property, we could light them on fire or rape them or take all their stuff or whatever. So that's crazy. But then if we think of going to the extreme the other way, do people own all property? That's not true either. So a lot of cases it's some, or it's a threshold. Like with making money, we don't need all the money in the world, and we don't need no money. We need some money. So then we think about what's a reasonable target, and then we might not know exactly what that might be. And once you stipulate that you don't know exactly what it is, then you just pick something that's within the target. It doesn't have to be a bullseye. It just has to hit the target. Even if you hit the outer rim of the target, you still hit it. So it might be $2 million. It might be $1 million. It might be $3 million. It might be 500,000 or $5 million. Whatever it might be. For money, for example, then you just stipulate. You pick something reasonable and you stipulate it, and then you start to work through the scenario of what you do with $2 million to accomplish remember, the main first thing you want to accomplish is be basically stable, And then it's kind of a toss-up between being comfortable with more money or being comfortable by not having to do the stuff that earns you more money, and then having a bit of a best use of your resources. And it's probably a little bit in between, once again, where there's some amount of money that you'll do in a way that you can make in a way that is something you're quite comfortable with. You might end up ironically making even more money starting that way, but often people are afraid, and it kind of gets them in a spiral where they feel like they have to make claims and do all this stuff because they feel like they have to make more money, and then they end up even making less. But regardless, let's just say it's the case that by doing something, once you have a stable base of money, then by doing something that is pretty nice and fun for you, and I can imagine this for myself. It's something I'm actually at this point, trying to build for myself. At this point, not really financially, but just kind of more for other reasons, practically, without having OMG suffer. I'm trying to build a situation for myself where I can do more specifically what I want to do. And that'll take in whatever money it does. Sorry, and my point here is that there's something, after you have enough money to get by as a stable base, kind of in a minimal way, then you might say, is it worth it to take on a few clients to do the work for them in order to buy this car? And it might be. And you just look at it side by side, right? And you can think of it more clearly because it's not confused with your stable base stuff. So that's another example of you pick something, you walk through the scenario, there's a gray area, but sometimes you eyeball something within a gray area, and it's fine because if you're off by a little bit, it's all similar, and you stipulate you couldn't have, in a lot of cases there isn't an exact right answer, such as the case of money, such as certain property rights issues. Where exactly do your property rights end and the next person start is not exactly easy to quantify in some cases. But once we have a stable base and we're eyeballing it within reason, then we're gonna be fine in most cases. What you'll find, Vincenzo, is if you just cross off the things that are obviously wrong, or you do the things that are obviously right, and then you reasonably eyeball the other stuff. And see, once you eyeball it, once you say, all right, when you look at it the right way, you still aren't going to be wildly off. If I'm eyeballing whether it's going to make sense to take on a particular client or do a particular venture in order to buy a nice car, I might end up being a little bit wrong, but I probably won't be like very wrong if I've otherwise decluttered my thinking. I'm otherwise thinking pretty right. You know you don't know the future. Maybe it'll turn out and say, well, it wasn't quite worth it. And maybe you won't even know for 10 years because you have to maybe have the car for several years before you can, feel like you know how worth it was. But you're not going to be wildly off, and it'll be fine. I don't know. Hopefully that gave you something to think about, and especially the target and threshold thing, and just getting a sense of what the target might be. And you might say, well, how do I know exactly what's going to hit the target or what the threshold is? Again, you don't, but you're not going to be wildly off generally. If I'm trying to think, all right, I want a certain amount of people to buy my product, but I want to make a sales letter that gets them to buy, but without promising too much or having my claims be too far off or having expectations be too high, where it'll have negative impact later. You don't know exactly how to hit that perfectly. I don't when I do a sales letter. But by keeping that in mind, that there is a threshold and I'm trying to eyeball it, then I'll be within a decent range of it, and it'll kind of put me in the best range that I'll do based on my current understanding. And then the only way to get it better is to understand more. But remember also, at every moment, we're only dealing with the level of understanding or the accuracy of our mental model that's in our mind right now that we currently have. And then we just try to improve on it from there. Chris wrote, why do I need to be confident before I get started? That means I'm restricted, and he's quoting me here, presumably favorably. Why do I need to be confident before I get started? That means I'm restricted to whatever I feel confident in life. That is the mental default. I can't know for absolute certainty, so how about if I get started and then ask someone later? This is a great statement and hits home. Great, I'm so glad, and thanks for pointing that out, Chris. Sure, we can all try to increase our understanding beforehand, namely before we provide services or an e-commerce product. But there are no perfect services or product, and best to move forward and test your understanding and build from there. Correct. And maybe there could be some exception somewhere, but in most cases, it's not going to be perfect. And if you don't know what the perfect might be, then you don't know. And then even if there was a perfect one, you don't know it yet. And the way to get there is to build on what you do know. So perfect. Thanks, Chris, for pointing that out. David Farlow wrote, totally revamping a sales presentation I've been struggling with. Thanks, David. Oh, you're so welcome, David. I'm so glad. Right, again, that's a perfect indication of that it's working, that I'm giving you the right questions to ask, right, even if I'm not giving you every detail. Also because there really are great details that I wouldn't even come up with anywhere near as well about sales, and all kinds of examples and stuff in books and everything. People come up with all sorts of brilliant stuff that I admire when it comes to sales. But by giving you the basic framework and questions to ask, then it'll help you take better advantage of that and filter it better. Because, of course, there could be some unhelpful advice, too. Rick said, I have 2 addictions. Both are purely good and beneficial. Alchemy and chocolate. Oh, that's great. Minimum 60% cacao, of course. What to do after Alchemy 31? Or Alchemy 30, right? We'll see. Hopefully, I'm pretty sure I'll do something after that as well. We'll find out, but it'll be a little bit less where it'll be more like, my offer will be more like you get what I feel like giving, which again, in many cases that'll be better, right? But it'll kind of be a nicer, even nicer framing for me. Oh, this has been terrific, but then it'll be a little bit more like that. Shirley said, it's so much easier to understand with metaphors. I love them. Certainly helps to remember. Just focus on building understanding is well settled in my mind. Thanks, David. That's wonderful, Shirley. I'm so glad. Yeah, and I'm well aware. I spend a lot of my thinking trying to come up with good examples and metaphors, and I rarely feel like I maximize that or I got it perfect. But although I do like I was quite happy when I came up with the idea of if you're given a plot of land and some building materials, that was one of the good ones. Whenever I come into a webinar with one or two good examples that have occurred to me, like particularly good ones, then it always helps. But sometimes they don't occur to me. Again, that's how the method of achieving goals is that I gave you, right? Is you can't make the answer appear. What you can do is keep building and let it reveal itself. And sometimes it reveals itself in time, and sometimes it doesn't. Where's the sales page to use for a client? I don't have a sales page to use for a client exactly, but Joe, I think even next webinar on Thursday in Special Ops will be going over more of a specific presentation to go with the video stuff that he's showing you and things like that. So we'll be giving you, in various places, we give you scripts and things to say and so forth. Not like a full-on script, but like examples. Cotton consistently in his webinars will say, here's what you can say for this particular situation and so forth. Jennifer writes, these concepts have been transforming my business. I've been meeting with business owners at ease with myself, which is something I'd previously had a story in my head about. The concepts in this presentation will continue to help magnificently. Thank you as always, David. Oh, I'm so glad. That's wonderful. Always a bit of a surprise if I hear that I've been extra clear or that it's nice. I'm glad that that's happening. John, of course, I could kind of, I don't directly have a goal for that feedback, or else I could easily artificially create it, with making my own points that if you can repeat back to me, then you've made progress. But it's great that even though I haven't done that, it's fun when you do the right process of letting things reveal themselves and doing what you can within that, where when it pays off, you feel extra glad, rather than it's really an even better payoff. And you guys have experienced this, I'm sure, with this, but when you don't force an answer, and you let it happen by building properly, and then it gets solved, it's an extra good feeling, because it reinforces the method in a good way. Like, it helps you to understand the method, and it's good. It's good to reinforce the correct method to our mind, because the wrong method is so ingrained by default that it's kind of a beautiful thing to, but the mind doesn't get pissed off. It enjoys it. It actually enjoys having the right method reinforced. So overcoming the default, getting things right, can be a real joyous thing that our mind doesn't even fight us on if we look at it the right way. Probably the not fighting us comes from the fundamental paradigm shift of seeking understanding, and then it no longer fights us. Probably something like that. I don't fully understand that. John said, missed the first hour doing a replay today for sure. I believe I need to methodically replay the entire series. I need a more absorbent brain. That's funny. No, you're not doing anything wrong if you need to do the replays. These are made to be replayed a few times. I'll often fit things in just so they're there and to give you questions to ask that there's no way you keep it all straight in your mind. I don't try to put such a structure that you would automatically remember everything from one webinar. I can't do that while at the same time really try to accomplish what I'm trying to accomplish in Alchemy, which is opening you up, getting you the right questions, getting you the right foundational stuff, which then you build up from. So certainly 2 or 3, 4 times. Cotton said that back before I had Alchemy, so we had less to listen to, but for my law of implication trainings, even back, I guess he joined in 2.5 years ago now, or more, 2 3/4 or so, whatever, but 2 2/3 years ago. I think it was January of 2014. But he said he listened to all the, at that point, there's more since he's created a lot of it, but the stuff in our No Holds Barred program. And then, but all the videos multiple times, maybe 3 times, but he said to listen to my law of implication training like 7 times each or something like that, at least. So you're doing as well as Cotton if you're listening several times. Me too. I'm installing Alchemy 1 replay. I feel like I'm on a new planet. That's excellent. That's the point. Susanna said, superb session again. Things are getting more and more clear. Excellent. And I'll wind things down here pretty quickly. Pete says, thanks a lot, David Mills. Great distilled knowledge as always. Total mind blown. We're all glad to spend 3 hours with you versus spending 20 years thinking about these concepts. I appreciate that. I appreciate that way of looking at it. Exactly. I know that some kind of perspective, people thinking about listening to Alchemy think, oh my goodness, 3 hours times 30, that's a lot of hours, but it's definitely the shortcut by far, by hundreds of times. And that's for the lucky ones that think about all this, right? Excellent. Bryce said, this Alchemy was so incredible. Oh wow, that's great. Well, the 27th one, and we're still going strong, huh? With all of the tests it does feel right to do well in them. Oh, and there's nothing wrong with doing well on tests. I mean, there's a system that rewards you for that. And so I took the ACT, and the max is 36. I got a 28, and should have been fine, which is, I think, a solid score, right? But it was depressed. Now when I graduate, I have to take a licensing test to prove to Illinois that I can do the job. That's great. By filling bubbles, tests are what makes someone qualified. But what if some is good at tests but does not perform or performs poorly in their career? Right, and the tests are there to, like, a school is there, generally it's going to revert to making money for the teachers in a stable way and them feeling like they're stable and making progress, right? All non-conscious systems, which is something to be fascinated with because our mind is one of those, and then there's all sorts of other systems like that we're dealing with in the world. They revert to survival, right, and feedback. That they're not making progress, like the feedback itself becomes the goal, and survival becomes the goal. So it's not even like doing well on a test won't necessarily help me in my career. They're almost entirely unrelated, right? And because there's nothing relating them at this point. Much like politicians need to get reelected for the most part and to feel good about themselves, and maybe have sex with people, right? A lot of them are motivated by that. But then saying it won't necessarily help the economy, the decisions they make, that misses the point. They're just almost entirely unrelated. They have their own motivations, and if they happen to coincide with something else, then they do. But if they don't, then they don't. Susanna wrote, so grateful to you, David. It's a good sign. I should stop in a few minutes if I can't speak right. I feel I got off the treadmill in the nick of time thanks to you. I'm so glad. Now my kids won't have to spend their lives on the treadmill. Amen to that. Excellent. Rick said, thank you, David, for spending so much time in the questions and comments. You always invest so much extra meaning and depth into your obvious, sincere elaboration. It has a great impact. You're very welcome, Rick, and thank you. Thank you for saying that. Matt said, yeah, it's awesome. Also, everyone's interest and contributions with comments is incredible. Absolutely, yeah. You guys make it possible, for damn sure. And it's pretty enjoyable for me. It's obviously much harder to prepare the standalone type of lesson, but necessary to lay the framework. I couldn't just do only question and answer from the beginning, or else I wouldn't be, I need to have some systematic nature to things, right, to lay the groundwork, I believe. But now it's made forever. The replay can be there forever. Morel said, fantastic webinar, David. Thank you very, very much. Oh, you're so welcome. Sherry wrote, the insight about maintaining self-image and wanting to be an expert before learning something new is huge for me. I realize that's the main reason I felt stuck in the same job for 10 years. Wow. Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, great. So much about alchemy, and including about conversion and making product, that I even meant to say this. And maybe I think I've said it in various ways previously, but so much what I can do for you with conversion and product formation is remove the block. Like the details of step-by-step how to make a good product, they're fairly obvious. Probably we could all name this, like come up with the same list once we don't have the blocks and we're naming it, right? And I could come up with a list and sound all clever, or maybe not clever, but at least I would sound like I was giving you structure and you could say, great. And I don't have such a list like off the top of my head. Right? I'm not saying I would withhold it from you if I had it, and I could easily give you such a list in the future. But really what we need is to remove the blocks that are in our way of making, not making a good product, what the hell, usually what is good? Our mind twists good. Remember this. I've said this before, but it's critically important. Our mind twists the very idea of goodness into that which furthers our goals, but then it twists it into also related to our goals. Our goals are based on what? On these kind of meta goals, these norms and standards that are out there. So our mind is going to twist good into relative to what's normal out there. And make sure I don't forget about so that relates to when I said making a good product with or without that. So blocks, it's not blocks to making, everyone can convince themselves of making a good product by the standards and norms things kind of circularly. But really the blocks to making, it's not just that I want you to be able to make good products, is that I want you to no longer think in terms of competition. I want you to think in terms of inevitable success. And of course, I want you to have the joy of snowballing and of really helping others even more. And it's so within your grasp to make a product or service. It doesn't even have to be better or unique. Again, just forget about that. Anything that has some comparative to other people, it's just irrelevant. But you'll just build something that's effective, and really it's just about removing the blocks to it and asking the right questions and having the blocks to getting the right foundation in place and so forth. So that's what I'm constantly trying to do for you in Alchemy, is if I can set you up. And with conversion, like I keep saying, there's so much good, genuinely good training out there and ideas that people have had and things they've figured out, both generalized and for specific niches. But I want you to have the foundation, the right questions to ask. I want you to be able to distinguish between conversion training that helps you with behaviorism, which is not necessarily wrong, but realizing it's within the box and it has the benefits and drawbacks to being in the box. The benefits to being in the box are it's quick. It's unnecessary to get outside of a box that's effective, so it's actually counterproductive to break a box that's working. So in the box is okay, but when you're with kids, for example, or with people that you have an ongoing relationship with, typically you want to work on the frame because you'll snowball that way. If you're using behaviorism with people that are like kind of in the box, changing their behavior, that if it's getting a certain behavior that isn't by default, that you're not going to get by default, you usually don't want to change the frame, not just change the stimulus. Again, use what I just said in the context of if you find a counterexample, it might be correct based on the idea that if the box is okay, if all you need to do is change what you're saying and it's easy, like if you just need to communicate something in a clearer way and that's all you need, then of course do that. But what I mean is if you just need to kind of get upset or threaten somebody, anything like that, to get them to do what you want, or if you need to trade too much and do all this, reward them extra, if you need to just reward someone to get a behavior, you probably want to find a better way to do it. You probably want to create a context where you can just ask. And that might be because you're trading overall, but not where you have to come up with a specific reward necessarily. That can kind of mess things up. Anyway, I'm in the lightning round here, so I can't do things total justice, but that might just spark some things for you. Elizabeth said, hi David, I just joined. You said previously about competition to not even consider it. How is that possible when the nature of what we're going is competing against others for rankings? I've said in the past that anything where you have a stipulated situation where someone's going to be number 1, number 2, number 3, then of course you do need to then you may need to come out number 1 or number 2 or in a certain place. Even then, focusing on process, even with SEO, is mostly where you want to focus, but you need to keep some eye on where you're ranking. But when you're an SEO consultant, you don't need to be thinking, you don't need to be that other SEO consultant. There's no one ranking you there, right? So there, you want to take your eye and your mind off of other standards and norms. And Cotton sure did this, because the amount of money he makes is just so far beyond anyone else's. If he was just trying to make more than the next guy, he would have, been making way less. And I don't only mean about money, of course, effectiveness. There's all kinds of other things that have to do with standards and norms regarding being an SEO consultant or a digital marketing consultant. But so regarding that, you don't need to compete. So only when it's totally stipulated that you have to come out number 1 or be somewhere in a competition where it's being ranked, then you need to keep your eye on that only to the extent that you need to, whatever that might be. But then otherwise, you just figure out how the world's going to look after you solve the problem, and then you work on your process and your understanding and your building from there. And good, yeah. And yeah, you can run what I say through logic. If you find like obvious logical things, then we could just assume that I meant it that way. I don't mind pointing it out. It helps me. But any kind of fairly things like that, you just what I mean is if you can't get to me to ask me a question, and you spot a kind of, don't do anything that common sense would dictate is ridiculous. Just trying to follow what I'm saying. Sorry, not common sense, but like clear logic. So certainly if you're ranking on Google, you have to be as high as you can. If you're running a race for the Olympics or anything like that, then you presumably want to win the race or place a certain amount. David, thank you for giving us the idea of having a semi-soft lock of just getting started. Oh, good. You're referring to a past webinar. With that, I did get my first client this week. Not paid, but very well connected, and already recommending my SEO services, leading from one new contact to another. It was easy to get inside him and see what he was dealing with, and it worked perfectly. Also, no pressure about ranking his site in a small city. No pressure meaning that you'll be able to do it easily. Good. A great place for me personally to begin the actual work. Very grateful to be starting and learning how Alchemy works. Right, building for what you know. Exactly, building ingredients and so forth. Taking apart ingredients so you can just have what you want. Wonderful, Megan. That's perfect. I'm so glad. Yeah, when I went on that rant about just getting started and your offer and take into account that you're getting what you want and so forth, right? 1 or 2 webinars ago, I agree. I thought that would be effective for people, and I'm so glad that it was for you. Matt wrote, David, thank you again. I have to go fulfill some contractual obligations. Wouldn't want to trample on property rights. Can't wait to re-listen. OMG is the best. Thank you, Matt. That's great. John says, thanks, David. Terrific. Yeah, I'll end the webinar here. Cynthia says, I'm also a comedian. So the payoff is laughter. I build understanding by jokes. The kill and bomb. There goes the rewrite. Public embarrassment is so useful. Great, Cynthia. Bryce said, thank you, David, for the webby. I hope to analyze all of these whenever I have a break from school. Certainly, Bryce. Thank you, David Mills, and all the attendees. Thanks, David. You're very welcome. David said, I'm going through a relativistic time distortion. At the beginning of Alchemy, it seemed like 3 hours. Now I'm wondering how David fits all this information into what seems like half an hour. Yeah, same thing happens for me. I agree. At the beginning, I'm like, not that I have to do 3 hours, but it'll seem like a big deal coming up. But then I get started, and it all happens so quickly, right? Leela said, I never thought to start with what I know, as I'm constantly feeling like I need to learn more before I start something. Thanks, David, for this webinar. You're very welcome, Leela. Joseph said, people told me for years I need to be confident in myself. And circularly you do. If you need, so to speak, if you believe that you need to be confident in order to move forward, then you need to be confident, or that you're, if you believe that confidence has to be based upon past rather than on your method, right, or how well you perform. Up until now, I thought that one had to be cocky to appear confident. Thank you, David, for showing me a way to real confidence. The house example spoke to you on many levels. Oh, I'm so glad. Excellent. And it's super easy to picture the opposite when it comes to dating, right? Someone that wants to feel confident in themselves when they're dating will generally behave in a counterproductive way in a lot of ways. A certain type of confidence can be beneficial, but even that is more confidence in method that comes from things. Like the way that confidence appears to be helpful typically is when people can end up basing it in method without even realizing it, where they're like, yeah, I know I could do this because I do this, that, and the other thing, and it works. You know. Joseph says, excellent session again, great. One day I'll proudly wear my Alchemy Junior badge. Number one, son, Joseph Jr. Yeah, and not even junior. You know, we can all be alchemists. I don't want anyone really having an identity where you guys are apprentices or ultimately or juniors or anything like that, or students, right? We're all alchemists. Excellent. You're very welcome, guys. Very welcome, Robbie, Vincenzo, Ra. Shema wrote, today's discussion of start with raw materials that we were given in life and then start from scratch to build anew. Is that what you mean by not just jumping from one box to another box? Jumping from one box to another box would be you realize that you don't want to just stay on the plot of land and with the materials you're given, and so therefore you build one other house, declare that that's the best ever and that's all you need, that's great, and then stay there. If that house hits a certain target, then you hit it and you're great. But if in life there's ultimately we want to get all our bad ideas out, get all the contradictions out, things like that, and so we don't want to declare perfection prematurely. You don't want to say the box that you're in is right if it's not. For example, most everyone's political beliefs, they might break out of them at one point, what they originally started, and change it, but then they're still having correct ideas with those beliefs, or religious, or with money, and so forth. And it doesn't mean you have to always get higher and higher boxes. Again, you can just, or better, bigger and bigger. There is an end point to things. And sometimes it doesn't even mean perfection. It just means you perfectly hit a target or get over a threshold. Federico says, continuing to make breakthroughs and going back to listen to replays and getting my mind blown and aha moments again. Only wish there were more hours in a day to listen more. I even find myself listening to it and falling asleep with Alchemy Addicted. Thanks, David. You're very welcome, Federico. Group hug. Take care, guys. You're welcome, Celine and Brian and everyone. All right, I'll end the webinar here. Good. I'm glad, Ra, that it'll help you apply self-confidence. Focus on method, on the method that underlies your skills, right? And that'll be a great place to build your confidence. It's kind of a shortcut. You're very welcome, Elke and Susanna and Peter. All right, we will end now since we've already exceeded our 3-hour threshold. You're welcome, Megan.